IB Nation, what's going on? Welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast, the Monday edition here. If you usually tune in to us on Monday, you know that we're usually doing a little bit of the recruiting hour conversation. But this week we had to throw a little bit of an audible because why? The spring football is starting this Wednesday, March 22nd. I know we're jazzed up about it. So in order to prepare you all for a very busy week of content, a very busy week of conversation, very busy week of football returning, we had to do a little bit of a spring primer, which today's show will be covering some of the interesting offensive storylines for spring practice, again, starting on Wednesday for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I'm Ryan Roberts, Director of Recruiting here at Irish Breakdown. That is Brian Driscoll, the publisher.
They got to know who you are, Ryan. I mean, you know what I mean?
I
like,
so.
you've been here over a year now. You're the man. They know who you are. They know who you are.
And of course, that man is actually the man, Mr. Brian Driscoll, publisher here at the site. And Brian, I know we're excited to get into some of the favorite offensive storylines here, but I think that we can't start a show off that is traditionally supposed to be a recruiting hour show without a little bit of recruiting talk. Because if you all weren't tapped in to the site, on the board, or on the Twitter space on Friday, you know St. Patrick's Day has now become a tradition for Notre Dame football. It's the Pot of Gold offer extravaganza, where they had offered out, I think, almost close to 90 scholarship offers to the 2025 recruiting class. So for the people that are obsessed with the recruiting side of the business, we gave you a lot of content this weekend. We gave you a lot of content on Friday. There's going to be content throughout the week. It's going to be
I got to tell Ryan to slow down on this content because I'm like, bro, you've got like 7 articles still in the pipeline that I haven't even been able to publish yet. So I love it. Ryan, it's an exciting time, man. I love the Pot of Gold situation. We actually have some real quick, too. I want to point out a couple other things as well. There's some really exciting things going on in our community. Andrew Sakalowski says, I'm just popping in to say hi. My wife's water is broken and the contraceptives are coming on, are coming on stronger. Can't wait to listen when mama and baby are asleep. So this is going to be Andrew's first baby. He just got married, not that within the last couple of years, if you remember. So congratulations, Andrew. Your life, I imagine, is about to be very, very different moving forward, as Ryan can attest to. And then Elizabeth Crook said, happy Monday, IB Nation, coming off a weekend where my oldest son got engaged. And here's the second best part of that conversation. Elizabeth already told them they can't get married during a Notre Dame game. That is what I love to hear. So a lot going on with our folks. I wanted to point those two things out. And then that leads right into some more exciting stuff, Ryan, is the Pot of Gold is so much fun. And they went big time this year. I mean, it's way more kids than, what was it, about 30 more than got Pot of Golds last year, 20, 30 more?
Yeah, so last year it was in the 50s. This year it was close to 90. So there was 30-plus extra offers, which I think was a great thing, honestly, Brian, because, we talk all the time about the committable versus non-committable offers and that kind of conversation. But last year, people forget, they didn't offer Justin Scott in last year's Pot of Gold. Like, they missed out on a couple guys in the 2024 cycle as far as giving them an offer when they deserved an offer, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the staff did a tremendous job of finding a great board, putting it together, evaluating a lot of players, man. 2025 recruiting class early on, just sophomores in high school, just finishing up their sophomore years. Looks like a very talented group. And I know one spot specifically, a position that we wanted to hit on, because there were several signal callers in the 2025 class, the quarterback position, that were offered on Friday. Brian, nationally, man, this quarterback class looks like it can ball, my friends. Like, there's a lot of really talented signal callers now on the board for Notre Dame.
Ryan, this from early impressions, this 2025 class overall is loaded at most positions. There's some I don't love so far, but that's just because I've only watched the Notre Dame kids. Like, receiver so far doesn't have me super fired up outside of a couple kids, which we'll get into. But, man, it is a loaded class, and the quarterback position is indicative of that. Look, I've only watched the kids that Notre Dame has offered. And if that's indicative of what this national class is going to look like, this is going to be a phenomenal quarterback class. And, like I don't give a lot of 5-star grades out as sophomores, Ryan. I've given 2 out at quarterback this year. Bryce Underwood, who got a Pot of Gold offer. Well, he got a Pot of Gold reoffer. And then George McIntyre, I believe, got a Pot of Gold reoffer as well. I believe George McIntyre had previously been offered by Tommy Rees.
I don't think so. I think the only 2 quarterbacks that were offered previously before this was Ryan Montgomery and Well, actually, no, I'm sorry, 3. There was Antoine Hill, Ryan Montgomery, and then Bryce Underwood.
I thought that McIntyre had, if not, he's got one now. He's from Brentwood Academy in Tennessee, where Alex Spars is from, Alex Bullock is from, who obviously also started at Notre Dame as well. You look at him, Ryan, you're like, oh, this big, tall, skinny kid, he's going to be raw, probably have like an Eric Ainge type of arm or a Justin Worley type of arm. And then you watch like his second or third throw, he just bombs it like 60 yards and hits a guy in stride. He got a 5-star grade for me. And then there's 2 other guys that are borderline 5 stars, and they didn't make 5-star for different reasons. But KJ Lacey from Alabama, the only thing that keeps him from being a 5-star right now, Ryan, is just he's not the biggest guy right now. But a lot of the stuff he does is just really outstanding. We'll dive more into him as well. And Deuce Knight was borderline 5. He's just so raw mechanically right now.
Yeah.
And so he's another guy that got offered. Cutter Boley. I mean, I graded Cutter Boley out as the 5th quarterback that got offered on Friday. And if a kid like Cutter Boley is your number 5 quarterback on a list, that's a pretty impressive list, Ryan. So it's a really, really, and I'm not a huge Ryan Montgomery fan. He's good, but he doesn't blow me away like the other guys do. Antoine Hill's elite talent, raw, but an elite talent, Ryan. So it's a great, great year at quarterback, which means why does that matter? It means the margin for error is going to be greater. Meaning you can miss on a couple guys and still get a flipping darn good quarterback. That's the reality of it. And so I think that's an important thing. It's kind of like the 2023 quarterback year. You could miss that on Dante and a couple other guys and still get Kenny Minchie, and you're like, this is a really good quarterback. And 24 is not quite as deep as 23 and 25. Top heavy, Donovan Raiola or Dylan Raiola's got elite talent. CJ Carr's a 5-star. It drops off a little bit after that. I still have to watch more of the Van Buren kid, but the 25 class is loaded. I want to start, Ryan, first of all, kind of work our way north to south a little bit on this one, right? Bryce Underwood's the first kid, obviously, that we'll talk about here. He's not only in conversation for the number 1 quarterback in the class in 2025, but he's going to be in the conversation for the number 1 overall player in the class. This is one of, without question, the best quarterbacks in high school football last year, regardless of class.
Yep.
I mean, I said this when I watched him as a freshman, Ryan. I said, if that kid doesn't get a lick better over the next 3 years, he's still a top 100 quarterback. Meaning if you took what he did as a true freshman and pretended he was a senior, he's got the talent of a top 100 quarterback compared to the seniors. And that's with 3 years of high school football left. And he comes out as a sophomore, Ryan, and he's even better, in my opinion.
Well, and I think that the 2 best players that I've watched in 2025 so far are Bryce Underwood and David Sanders, the offensive tackle out of North Carolina. Like, those 2 are, to me, players that, although natural maturation still needs to happen, right? Like, they need to add weight to their frames and get stronger, like any sophomore would need to do. You could drop them in almost any class, and you're like, yep, that's a 5-star type of football player. Like, you could just drop them in. Bryce Underwood, 6'3", 205 pounds. Brian, I don't know what they're doing in the state of Michigan, man, but you have Dante Moore, CJ Carr, and then Bryce Underwood in back-to-back years.
I would argue that trio up against any group of number 1 quarterbacks in the country anywhere.
Right.
I mean, Dante was the number 1 quarterback in last year's class on my board. CJ right now is the number 1 quarterback on my board in 2024. And Bryce Underwood is and again, I don't think Notre Dame, they have a shot with Underwood, but I don't think they're going to get Bryce Underwood. They're in the game, but I don't think he's going to go to Notre Dame. So this has nothing to do with Notre Dame. This is the best quarterback in the 2025 class, in my opinion.
And it didn't change anything for me as far as, and I know you too, like Dante Moore not ending up in Notre Dame, like that didn't change our opinion on him, right? He's a great player, man. He's the best quarterback in the class. Yeah. Legit 5-star quarterback in the 2023 class. Bryce Underwood, no matter where he ends up, that kid is 6'3", 205, can throw the football as good as anyone in the last couple years of recruiting side of things. He has legit arm talent too. You see him throw a touch to the intermediate deep portions of the field, throw to the sideline outside the numbers. That kid's legit. And then all of a sudden, and by the way, Brian, if he wasn't able to run, he would be a top 25 player in the class, right? And then you add in the fact that he's a legit 4'6" athlete too. Like, the kid can run.
That's the difference right there. And that's what ultimately separates Bryce Underwood and CJ Carr from Dante. Dante throws the ball as well as any high school quarterback I've seen since Jimmy Clausen. I mean, his just God-given ability to sit in the pocket and spin it. It's like he was created by God to throw the football. I mean, I really believe that. He has got as natural a feel as a thrower. Bryce Underwood and CJ Carr are very similar. I think Bryce is ahead of CJ in that regard. Dante's ahead of CJ in that regard. I think CJ's got a stronger arm than Dante. But the thing that separates Bryce and CJ from Dante, and why I think their ceilings are higher, is they're really good athletes.
Yeah.
And they can run. Dante's a good athlete for a pocket passer. He's not a runner. Bryce Underwood is a legit dual threat guy if he wanted to be. But the thing I love about it is he's a pocket passer who just happens to also be really athletic. And that's the same thing with CJ Carr. CJ is a pocket passer that happens to be really athletic. And the quarterback, it's like the Joe Burrows and the Trevor Lawrences, right? In college, if Trevor Lawrence needed to, he could go run for 100 yards in the game. But you didn't need him to. He didn't have to do that. He was a pocket passer. And that's what I love about Bryce Underwood, Ryan, is, you're going to hear the dual threat term thrown around, and he is because he's athletic. Sure. But make no mistake, this is a kid that is an elite pocket quarterback.
Well, you want to talk about what separates players for me? The fact that I could drop Bryce Underwood off into the Chip Kelly Oregon offense, and he would be a playmaker in that offense. I could drop him off into Ohio State's offense now. He would be a incredible player in that offense. I could drop him off in Alabama. I could drop him from Notre Dame.
Yeah.
The key is that Bryce Underwood can excel in any offense out there. You want a West Coast system?
What's that? For one.
Uh-oh. Michigan?
He ain't going to Navy, baby.
Oh, okay.
Right? He ain't going to Air Force. He ain't going to Navy. He ain't going to Army.
He probably could if he wanted to, though. He probably could. That's just kind of the thing, right?
6'3" is a little tall for an option quarterback.
A little
He's
bit.
He's going to get his knees.
I'll give it. Hey, Will Worth was like 6'2", though. So,
but Will Worth was a rocked up
tank.
dude.
Yeah, he was a tank.
But I say that jokingly, right? Because you're absolutely right. If he needed to run an air raid, he could run an air raid. If he needed to run an under center, he could do Wisconsin's old offense. He could do Notre Dame's pro-style shotgun offense. He could do Sark's offense. He could literally do anything you need him to do. And there aren't a lot of kids that bring – and I feel that way about CJ as well. That's one thing I love about CJ as well is, Dante was a little bit more – had to fit into a certain type of offense. That's why I'm very curious to see how he's going to fit in at UCLA, because he's not the runner that Chip Kelly's used to having. But it's going to be fascinating to see how they all develop. But the thing I like about Bryce too, Ryan, is he shows all the mental and instinctive traits you want. Great timing as a passer, great touch, great accuracy, good decision maker. But he's also got elite arm strength, in my opinion, as well. Like borderline elite arm strength. He doesn't have like Nico's arm. It's that next level of Nico's arm. I mean, I'm watching him, Ryan, in Lions Stadium, and I believe it was a playoff game, a semifinal or championship game, and he fits a 25-yard seam route right over a linebacker right in front of a safety. And then also in that game, he hits about a 655 or so yard bomb, just hits a guy over the top and try. And he doesn't even really whine. He steps into it, but then he just flicks it. He's a kid that's got really special tools. There's no doubt. Yeah. But he's not alone. That's the thing. That's what I love about 2025 class. Because you and I were kind of, I don't say arguing, because it wasn't an argument. It was a fun conversation. We were discussing, kind of going back and forth about, well, I think this guy could be the next guy. I think this guy could be the next guy. I think this guy could be the next guy. My number 2 on the board is George McIntyre. When I look at George McIntyre, Ryan, he's from Brent. He's big, tall. He's a true pocket passer, in my opinion. But he can run. He's an athletic kid. He plays basketball. He's a pretty good basketball player at the high school level. Yep. So he's not a guy that I want running right now because he's really skinny. But he's another guy that brings some of that Trevor Lawrence type of game to the table. I think the biggest thing that surprised me, Ryan, when I saw McIntyre, I saw a tall, skinny kid. He goes to a private school. You see a guy that throws good timing, a guy that is processing information pretty well for a sophomore, a lot like Underwood. The thing that shocked me the most, Ryan, because of his frame, was how the ball jumps out of his hand. Yeah. I mean, it really explodes out of his hand. Deep ball wise, he gets good zip on it. He's banging deep comeback routes. This kid's arm talent is special. He's got to fill out that frame a lot. But he, in my opinion, has really elite physical tools as well, especially once he fills out, Ryan, because he's going to be, he's going to be 215, 220 when it's all said and done, but he's like a $175 right now. He's skinny.
Yeah. He's long, man. He's long, which it makes complete sense that he's also a standout basketball player, obviously, at Brentwood, because he's got a little springiness to him, man. Like, this isn't just a pocket passer, a guy that's kind of stiff in the pocket. Like, he's got light feet to him. He can move around a little bit. But I mean, more than anything, Brian, I think you hit it on perfectly. He has, of the board for Notre Dame now in 2025, pure arm strength, top 2 in the class, most likely, as far as just pure God-given ability to put velocity on the football. Up there with him and Antoine Hill are probably the guys on the board that you're like, that's the easiest velocity of anybody on the class.
Because you'd put him ahead of Underwood when it comes to that regard, right? Even ahead of Underwood when it comes to power.
Yes.
Correct?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. I think that Underwood has a little bit more of, I don't want to say, I think he's got a little bit more of a natural touch to him, but McIntyre throws a good touch too. So it's not like he's not good at that, right? It's just, Underwood's just a little bit of a different cat. But George McIntyre is also the son of Mike McIntyre, who's, been a coach for a long time. And I think that mental capacity is a good thing, obviously, for the quarterback position. He's been around the game for a long time. I know it's very cliche to say like coach's son, blah, blah, blah,
but
blah,
it's true.
But it matters. It does matter. Yeah. It matters 100%. And
he does everything you'd expect. I'm sorry, Ryan. I want to lead you into this because I know what you're going to say. But like, to me, it's you said cliche. I would use the word stereotypical.
Yeah.
Right. He's the stereotypical coach's kid in that he does things mentally, naturally.
Right.
And I think that's something that separates, to me, this class. Is there's a lot of kids like this in this class that just they get the game at a really high level. And I think that's what I love about Bryce Young and Bryce Underwood and George McIntyre, Ryan, is the mental part of the game. They are elite before you even get to the physical tools. And that's something you assume that about McIntyre because he's a coach's kid.
Right. Well, I think it's a good conversation is the stereotype side of it, right? I think that you hit on that because one thing that there's a negative connotation about it though, is that when you think of coach's son at quarterback, you would assume that kid doesn't have much tools. He's just smart. And that's not the case for George McIntyre. If you strip George McIntyre of his upbringing being around the game of football, the kid has legit tools, right? It's just what makes him such an intriguing prospect and the potential to be such a good player on the next level is that you have 6'5" with a bazooka with an arm, natural throw of the football, combined with the fact that he also has that background and the mental capacity of being around the game for a long time. Yeah. That's the separator. That's what separates him between him and Antoine Hill, for instance, right? Where it's like Antoine Hill, God-given ability, maybe the best in the class, but he's not as far along developed. He's not as nuanced as a passer right now. George McIntyre is an advanced level passer because of his upbringing, and you combine that with the tools that he has, you have the potential to be very good, obviously, on the next level.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, I've got these kids, as we're talking, I got these kids on film, and the thing I like about both of them is they can also make plays out of script. I mean, they can move, and they both run with the first thought of, I'm running to make a play. Now, Underwood has more designed runs in high school. Neither of them have a ton of designed runs. But they're both guys that do a lot in the pocket as far as like running around, scrambling, buying time, flipping their hips, getting that ball downfield. And they're just really dynamic.
Yep.
Next, Ryan, I want to go down to the state of Alabama for a kid that you think is also in the conversation for the next best quarterback in the class. And that is KJ Lacey, who's from the state of Alabama, obviously.
Yep.
Now, when I hear of a kid from Alabama, my first thought is, okay, he's probably going to go to Alabama. And I don't know if he is or isn't, but the fact is Notre Dame offered the kid, and he's really talented.
Yes.
This is a kid but he's completely different than the other two kids we met. He's 6 foot. He's like 185. And, Ryan, you had a great comment to me. You said it's really lazy when people like see a 6 foot black quarterback and they say, oh, Bryce Young, right? It's really lazy. But it's like, in this instance, it's kind of like comparing a 6 foot white quarterback to Drew Brees. You know what I mean? It's like it's lazy. But man, I'm watching this kid's film. Like, this kid plays the game so much like Bryce Young. And the other thing about him is He plays the game differently. He's a make plays off script. He's got a lot of Russell Wilson to him, in my opinion. But he's another guy that I look at and I say, this kid's anticipation and ability to process reads and get the ball out on time and throwing guys open for a sophomore is just something we don't rarely see. And this is now the third kid in a row that we're going to talk about that with, Ryan. The football IQ that these three kids have is, to me, exceptional. Yeah, exceptional. And that's the thing I love about KJ Lacey, because when you first start watching this film, you see, I mean, he's throwing sidearm. He's like, around guys. He's doing stuff like Tyler Buckner did. He's throwing outs. He's running around. He's scrambling around. His like release point changes like every throw.
Yep.
But then you're watching and you kind of study it a little again, and you go through it again, and you're like, this kid's timing and anticipation, ability to make reads and quickly get the ball out for a sophomore is outstanding. It really is.
I think Lacey threw like 40 touchdowns and like 5 interceptions as a sophomore, like some crazy production on his side. But man, I think that there's another assumption that you come to, Brian. When I saw 6 foot 180, right? You're just like, the kid's probably going to be a nice athlete, right? Maybe not the strongest arm in the world. But then I watched him throw like twice, and I'm like, oh, that kid's arm's live. That ball's coming out with it. That kid is coming out with velocity. And the crazy part is that a lot of the throws that he gets and really creates velocity, he's kind of falling off his platform a little bit, right? Like he's falling off his back foot, and he's just uncorking these balls where I'm just like, man, that dude's arm is live. He's an ad-libber. He makes things out of structure really well. But like you said, he's got the timing. He's got the precision. He's got really nice ball placement. And his arm is just really, really good. And although I think that he could be a legitimate run threat, he is a lot like Bryce Young in the sense that he makes his best plays as an extender as a passer, not as a runner. Like he could be a runner if he felt like it, but he wants to throw the football. He wants
According
to do that.
To Max Preps, Ryan, he was minus yards rushing last year.
It makes sense because
you watch his film, like there's like almost no runs in there.
Exactly.
There's just like no runs.
Exactly. Yeah. And so like when you look at him, you're just like, that kid's a good athlete, but he wants to throw the football. Like he is a quarterback that happens to be a good athlete, not just an athlete playing quarterback. Like there's a big difference there.
I'd actually like to see him run more, to be honest with you. I mean, that's something I don't know why he doesn't. I would like to see him. Maybe that's just part of the system. I'd like to see him run more, to be completely honest with you. But he's a dynamic kid. I don't think his ball placement is quite as good as Underwood and McIntyre. That's something for me. It's good, but it's not great. Those guys have great ball placement. That and his size are the two things that probably drag him down below them. So I have McIntyre and Underwood as 5 stars. I have KJ as a 4.5 star, which is a top 50 player. And I think those two things are really what set me apart. But he's got a really good feel for the game, and his ability to make plays off platform is a lot. In that regard, Ryan, even reminds me a lot of Dante in that regard. He changes his arm angles and his launch points as effectively as often as Dante does. I wouldn't say quite as effectively, because I mean there aren't many guys that I've seen that can put the ball, where Dante can put the ball, but he's a really talented thrower. I don't see how. I'm really curious to see, because like I know Tommy Rees has offered George McIntyre, and George McIntyre certainly is very much Tommy's cup of tea, right? I'm very curious to see if Tommy Rees, what he thinks of KJ Lacey, because like he's a pocket guy. He just doesn't look like a pocket guy.
He doesn't. He doesn't. But I'm also interested to see if he gets a little bit of the Kenny Minchie maturation, Brian, right? Like maybe he gets an inch taller, he gets a little thicker in the base. And, because the one thing about KJ is that KJ is the small guy in this quarterback class on the board for Notre Dame, right? You're talking about a bunch of 6'3", 6'5" guys on the board for Notre Dame. KJ is really the only undersized guy, which I think does limit as far as what his high upside is. Like I still think he has legit upside, but is his upside as high as a Bryce Underwood, for instance? Is as high as a George McIntyre? Probably not, just because there's some size limitations. But I think that kid can ball, man. Yeah. Like if you end up with KJ Lacey as your quarterback in the 2025 class, you're in a good spot. Like you're good, man.
You got a dude. There's another Southern kid, Ryan, that we'll talk about. Actually, we skipped a kid. We'll go to him next. I apologize, because we were going to go north and work our way down. But we'll stay in the Southeast, and that's Deuce Knight And I know this is a guy, Ryan, that you look at and you see 6'4". He's a lot like George McIntyre, 6'4", real skinny, string bean type of guy. Has a frame that looks a lot like Nico in a lot of ways, Ryan. And then you pop on the film and you're just like, yet another incredibly talented quarterback in the 2025 class that Notre Dame offered. And he has a visit set up to Notre Dame already. So he'll be up 1st. In, was it April 1st? Correct? He'll be up to Notre Dame. So clearly they're in the game for Deuce, or because he's going to visit. But he's different, Ryan, in that Deuce is a lot more raw. You can tell he hasn't been coached the way that these other kids have. You had mentioned to me that he came from a program where I think they were like 3-7 or 3-8 or something like that. But man, he's a lefty, right? Which for me takes some getting used to. Yes. He's not as shifty as some of the other quarterbacks, but he's a much better straight line runner. Yeah, in my opinion. This is a really talented quarterback, Ryan.
I think he's got some comparisons coming out of high school. Not as I mean, I'm not going to compare a kid that's going to be a senior in college to a sophomore in high school, but you get some Jaden Daniels vibes a little bit from a body type perspective and kind of the athleticism perspective, right? Like Jaden could run, and he's still a string bean. So hopefully Deuce fills out a lot more, kind of earlier in his career. But I mean, Deuce Knight, man, just point blank to it, right? He's 6'4", strong arm. I usually hate lefties. I usually hate watching it, but I loved watching Deuce Knight, man, because I think that he has some of the more natural gifts of this quarterback class of guys I've watched in 2025. If he fits with a good developer at the quarterback position, he's got a chance to be really good. Because like you said, Brian, not a lot of talent around him, which causes him to play a little bit of hero ball at times, right? He's holding the ball a long time. He's scrambling around because he has to. He's trying to make a play, man. So get him around a good quarterback coach, though, and a good offense coordinator that can really accentuate his strengths. I think he has a chance to be a dynamic dual-threat quarterback.
Well, and that's why he's not a 5-star on my board, is what you were talking about. He's very raw. His arm motion is it's a little bit more mechanical from the pocket. When he's his most loose as a thrower is when he's moving around. He throws he whips it out there, but from the pocket, he's a little mechanical. He just hasn't been coached the way the other kids have been coached at this point in time, Ryan. But I don't think his arm is quite as strong as some of those guys, but it's kind of like we're getting into this debate of which guy with a great arm ranks at the bottom of guys with great arms. You know what I mean? It's like
there's nobody on this list that does not have at least a very good arm.
Very good arm. Yeah. You know what he reminds me of? He reminds me a lot of a more athletic version of Hendon Hooker coming out of high school.
Nothing wrong with that, man.
Hendon Hooker was also a really tall string bean, live arm but raw type of guy.
Hendon Hooker was like a 110 high hurdler coming out of high school too. Like he was that type of kid. Yeah.
So I that's who, talk about comps. That's who obviously, I could force a lefty comp if you needed me to, but as far as style of play, the only thing that him and Hendon Hooker don't really have in common is right hand versus left hand. I mean,
right.
Hendon was a good runner in high school too. He didn't do a ton of that at Tennessee. But if he needed to, he could hurt you with his legs in a big way. He wasn't doing like a ton of design runs, but he could scramble and things like that. Like that, this kid reminds me a lot of Hendon Hooker. Really
Hendon Hooker ran a lot more at Virginia Tech because that's just kind of how their offense, like that's what they needed him to do because their passing game was just so atrocious, right? Yeah. But I mean, to your point, I think that the comp really stands tall, Brian. And I think that, for me, again, Deuce Knight is a ball of clay. And he is he's one of the better deep ball throwers of anybody on the list right now, man. Like that ball, if anybody has ever thrown javelin or been around javelin just from the track and field perspective, there are some javelin throwers that when it hits kind of the apex in the air, right, where it's just like that thing sailing, it usually dies a little bit, right? And there are some javelin throwers, though, that you hit it there, and there's a little bit of turnover there, right, where it keeps sailing. And that's what I think about Deuce Knight's deep ball, man. He throws some balls where you're like, okay, that ball's dying a little bit, and then it just keeps going. Like, it just keeps going. And it's just – it ain't – and I do like the Hendon Hooker comp, though, because I think that he would be fantastic in a Josh Heupel type of offense. Like, he would be incredible with that vertically oriented type of system because he has a really nice deep ball, man, and he can run. So I really like that kid because he has all the tools in the world. It's just about you have to have a developmental plan for him because he's not going to be day one starter. He's not going to be a guy that's going to come in and be seamless. His long term is going to outweigh his short term. I mean, depending on development over the next 2 years, but long term, the kid has all the tools to be really, really good.
Yeah. Next, let's talk about Cutter Boley. Certainly has the most interesting name on this board. Him and Deuce Knight have the two best names on this board. Cutter Boley's from Kentucky, and another guy that is just a really talented kid. He is 5th on my board, Ryan, right now. Reasons why he's not nearly as athletic as he's not a stiff by any. He's not Jack Cohn as an athlete, but he's not he's not a super mobile. He's not a super mobile guy. Feet are a little slower. Yeah. Has a little bit of a funky throwing motion, which I think can create some ball placement issues at times, but his arm is strong. He seems to process information relatively well. There's a lot of tools to work with me, Ryan. He's just not the dynamic athlete that some of these other guys are. And I think his throwing motion is a little bit windy up-ish, I guess is the way that I would put it. For me, but it comes out really well. I mean, the ball comes out of his hand really well.
Now he's got plus arm strength, man. Like his arm is in the conversation with some of the better arms on the list. It's just, I think to your point, Brian, I think that we agreed on this one 100% when we talked about it before. He's a really good pocket quarterback. It's just, I don't think that he's going to be a guy I don't think he's going to be dynamic outside of structure. Like, I don't think, he has enough to move.
Project as well. Yes.
To move inside the pocket, it's good. He can move inside the pocket. It looks good in that regard, but he's not going to break the pocket and really, create some big plays consistently on the run. He's not going to be a tremendous runner at the next level. What he is though in a system that is predicated on staying in the pocket, surveying, getting the football out. That's his type of style. And he's got plus arm strength, man, where you don't have to just run West Coast stuff and get the ball out quick. Like, he can take 5-7-step drops and he can get the ball down the field because he's got good arm strength. So there's a lot of good to be with Cutter Boley. Yeah. I think to your point that you nailed it perfectly. In the pocket's really good, strong arm. It's just he's not quite the dynamic elements that some of the other quarterbacks
we're
have.
Splitting hairs here, guys. We view him as a top 100 player, right? Like, that's the thing about Cutter Boley. He's a top 100 player in my opinion. It's just when you're talking about 5 really talented kids, you've got to separate it somehow. But the live arm part, Ryan, because to me, I think he can make plays off out of structure a little bit as a pocket guy, meaning like he can make a guy miss, step into the pocket, and just unload a bullet. He can climb the pocket and really deliver some stuff. He's just not going to be the kind of scrambler and the kind of mover arounder that some of these other guys are. I'm just making up words today. But the thing I like about
windy uppy and mover
windy
arounder.
uppy, that's what you got to do, man. But he's a tough kid, though. If you watch his high school film, his offensive line is not very good. He's throwing with guys in his face a lot, and he's got some cojones in the pocket. I'll give him that. And again, we're talking about a sophomore. His athleticism could jump up a bit over the next couple of years as well.
And he's already 6'5", 205 pounds or so. Like, he's going to be 230 pounds. Yeah. Like, he's going to be a big kid, a big pocket quarterback.
I saw him at Irish Invasion last year. Had a really funky delivery that I think he's altered it, because at the Invasion, he was like dropping like down here throwing. Like, it was really, I didn't like it at all. He was a little bit more up as a sophomore. He brought the arm up a lot more as a sophomore. So I was happy to see that.
Yeah.
But he's a talented kid as well, Ryan. This is a really, really good group of quarterbacks. Again, we're having to find flaws in kids that I think we both agree that they're all 5 top 100 players, in my opinion. I mean, it's a really loaded group. And so he's obviously, there's some interest there for him. He's a kid that's been to Irish Invasion. He's been on Notre Dame's campus. So that's another kid that I think Notre Dame has a shot with. I don't know where they stand with George McIntyre. I have no idea. I know that they've had success at Brentwood Academy, and obviously they've had more recent success in the state of Tennessee. I don't know where they stand with KJ Lacey at this point in time. Deuce Knight's coming on campus in April, so that's obviously a really good sign. Cutter Boley has been on campus before. That's a really good sign. And obviously Bryce Young Underwood is a guy that likes Notre Dame. I just don't think Notre Dame is ever going to kind of get to the point where they're able to, like, CJ Carr loved Notre Dame like from day one. Like, he had a thing for Notre Dame from day one. Dante loved Notre Dame from day one. I think Bryce Underwood likes Notre Dame. I just don't think he views Notre Dame as like some of the other schools on this list, in my opinion. So, but
That's fair.
they're in it with those three that I know of. But as we said, Ryan, it's a loaded quarterback class. You know what else is loaded in the 25 class, Ryan?
What's
the
that?
state of Illinois. The state of Illinois is absolutely we're going to talk about 5 kids from Illinois, Ryan. And if Notre Dame signed all 5 of them, I'd be like, all right, let's go. I don't think it's going to be practical to sign all 5, which we'll get into because there's some positional like consistency there where there's like several guys in the same position. But look, 24, there's some Illinois kids they have to get. They have to get Justin Scott. There's a couple kids like that they have to get. 25 is even bigger for Notre Dame in the state of Illinois. They've got to get at least 3, if not 4, of the 5 kids we're going to talk about. And we'll get to the defensive side of the ball first. But it is not often that there is a dynamic receiver from Northern kid that's athletic, that can run, that can make plays after the catch, that can do all those things, Ryan, and is from kind of, now I won't say Notre Dame's backyard because it's a little west of Chicago, but it's basically west of Chicago. It's 2 hours away from Geneva, Illinois. This is a kid that, to me, it's so early to be talking about must-gets, but Talon Taylor, to me, is a must. There's 2 kids from Illinois for sure, flat out, hands down, no doubt about it, are must-gets in the 25 class, which should tell you how good they are, that we're talking about a 25 kid being a must-to-get. But Talon Taylor, to me, Ryan, is you just don't get this. You normally have to go down to Florida or Georgia or Texas or California to get a kid like Talon Taylor, and he's from 2 hours away. I mean, this is a big-time football player, in my opinion.
I think the first time you talked about him, you said he reminds you of the 2 Ohio State kids, like a little bit of a combination of Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Yeah. And obviously, when you hear that, you're like, oh, man, that's high praise, obviously, right? Like, that's 2 really good football players. Both went in the first round, top 11 picks in the 2022 NFL draft, and both had 1,000 yards as rookies. But then you watch Talon Taylor, and you're like, that's a kid that usually goes to Ohio State. That is, man. Like, he is 6 foot, 170 pounds, right around right now. Only a sophomore in high school, so he'll get bigger, obviously. But the first couple plays, Brian, I'm watching, I'm like, that kid is smooth, man. Like, gets in and out of breaks, really advanced route runner for his age. But then there's a play, I think it's like the 3rd or 4th play on his highlight, where he catches something over the middle, and he breaks angles, man, and he shows off the speed, and you're like, oh, he's not just a route runner. He's not just smooth. That kid's got some juice, too. And when you put all those things together, I'm like, that's what made Garrett Wilson so special, in my opinion, right? It was like Garrett Wilson could run routes, smooth player, but then he had legitimate, like, high 4.3, low 4.4 speed, right? So you're just like, that kid can do it all. That kid can be a multi-level threat. Talon Taylor has that same feel that, like, if he wasn't quite as fast as he is, he could still be a really good college player because of the route runner that he is, the ability to get in and out of breaks. But then you add in the fact that he's got long speed as well. That kid's a multi-level threat. He can affect short, intermediate, deep. He can create big plays after the catch. He's got kind of that all-around profile that Ohio State's had at wide receiver over the last couple of years.
I'll give you this. His floor is TJ Jones. Similar body type, similar athleticism, right? CJ wasn't quite the dynamic player, right? His ceiling is Garrett Wilson to me. I mean, that's who this kid could be. And again, that's very high praise for a sophomore. We got to see how he's going to project and how he's going to grow in the next couple of years. But this is a really talented kid, Ryan. And you've talked to him, and there's legitimate interest in Notre Dame with Talon Taylor. Like, this is a kid that Chancey Stuckey is like, Coach, there is no more important receiver on your board in either the 24 or 25 classes, in my view, than that kid. I really believe that because you've already got Cam Williams, right? I mean, Cam's already signed. Right, so you've already got that one Illinois player. If you can give me Cam Williams and Talon Taylor back-to-back years in the state of Illinois, that's huge for Notre Dame. And this is why it's so important. And Sean Davis has talked a lot about this. Illinois is climbing back up when it comes to producing more big-time football players and not just running backs and linemen and guys like that. You're seeing more and more skill players. We had the kid a couple years ago that Notre Dame was looking at, whose name right now is completely is Caleb Brown. That I loved a couple years ago that went to Ohio State. you're starting to see more kids like that where they're now starting to put more athletes out there. AJ Henning, who went to Michigan, hasn't quite panned out, but a very dynamic player. He's had some injuries, but you're starting to see that. And if Illinois can start consistently producing top 50 national players at wide receiver and Notre Dame can get them, that's huge. You got one, and Cam Williams is on board. That was a huge pickup. Now it's Taylon Taylor. And so again, I know that's a bold statement, Ryan, but it's not just that he's necessarily the best player out there. I mean, Ryan Wingo's a stud, and there's some other guys, but it's the notion of you have got to figure out a way to make Chicago once again your state. Meaning Georgia can get a kid if we don't want them. That's how it needs to be for Notre Dame, right? Michigan can get a kid if we don't want them. That's what Notre Dame staff needs to create. And that's why it's so important to get that, because Michigan's been kicking their butt in Illinois. Ohio State's been kicking their butt in Illinois for these type of athletes. That can't happen. You've got to make Illinois basically your home base, in my opinion. And this is an example where if you can win this battle, it completely and along with Cam Williams back-to-back, completely changes your fortunes when it comes to recruiting those big-time players from the state of Illinois.
And you have to, so I mean, there's two parts to that conversation. One, you have to identify those players, right? And then two, you got to close on those players. You mentioned Cam Williams, Brian. We both liked Cam Williams after his sophomore year, but junior year Cam Williams was like, oh, buddy, that's a top 50 football player now. Like we're moving, we're cooking with grease now. Like I thought Notre Dame got a good football player when he committed, but now I'm looking at him like that kid is a legit maybe 5-star player if he takes another step as a senior. Like he's that type of profile, in my opinion. But they identified him early. They identified him early. Justin Scott, they didn't identify early. They didn't identify that one as well. So this needs to be a more consistent approach over the next couple of years in Chicago and just generally in Illinois, in your home base, that you need to identify those kids early, and then you need to close on them. Because the one thing that Illinois kids know, they know Notre Dame, man. They know what Notre Dame is. They know the brand. You don't have to go out to California and convince people what Notre Dame is, right? You could stay in Illinois and say like, hey, man, I'm from Notre Dame. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, I know all about Notre Dame. I've been around them the entire life. I know that brand, right? Like you don't have to convince the people of what the brand, how much the brand extends in the state of Illinois. So when there are players in that home base that you want, that you identify, and that makes sense, you have to get them. There's zero excuses. If Taylon Taylor's a guy that Notre Dame identifies and says, that's our dude, you got to be able to close on a guy like a Taylon Taylor, because there's just no excuse for letting those types of players leave the area.
You talked about Cam Williams and how they got on him early. This is why it mattered. When they first got on Cam Williams, Michigan was his favorite school because Michigan had been recruiting kids like him from the state and from the area. And then obviously Ann Arbor's not that far away from Chicago either. It's a little further than Notre Dame, but it's not that much further away. If you slow play Cam Williams as you let the national, because this is the issue they have at, right? They try to let the national board kind of grow before they move on local kids. And that's a mistake. And that's the mistake they made with Justin Scott, which it should have been obvious day one, you go make a move on that kid. With Cam Williams, Chancey Stuckey and Tommy Reese and Chad Bowden, that trio said, okay, this is a kid that we need to push for. They saw the upside. They saw the potential. They saw a skinny kid who's going to get more explosive as he gets older. Had they waited if they had waited until his junior year was done, he'd be entrenched at Michigan by then. Because you allow that Michigan relationship to grow and get stronger and stronger and stronger during the months in which you slow played him. They were smart to get on him early, and they identified the potential early, and that's why they were so easily able to overcome Michigan and get his commitment. The mistake they've made in the past is they're way too slow getting on a lot of these kids in Chicago. I like the fact that this staff is not doing that, and they're going after these kids hard now. They, again, with Justin Scott, they did not, but we'll see what they do with the 25 defensive linemen. But in Taylon Taylor's case, they got on him early, and it mattered because this is a dude, Ryan. It is an absolute dude. The other thing that Notre Dame needs to be a championship caliber team is impact defensive linemen. There's an impact defensive lineman in 2024 from Chicago. We know about him named Justin Scott. However, Justin Scott was not the defensive player of the year in his league, as Sean Davis has pointed out to us. The defensive player of the year in that league, according to Sean, was Nathaniel Marshall, who is a 2025 defensive end from Fenwick, which is a private school, another private school kid. Ryan, if you think his football highlights are impressive, go watch him play basketball. This is a freaky kid. He's what, 6'4", probably like around 250. He looks to be 250, big end type. That is an absolute stud defensive line, Ryan. I mean, he is right now a top 50 kid right now that's going to be pushing for 5-star status when it's all said and done. And he's, again, private school kid from Chicago. Again, must get player.
For people that follow recruiting closely and they flash back real quick to the 2023 class for Notre Dame, one guy that Notre Dame was very high on but did not get a commitment from was Jason Moore out of DeMatha Catholic that's going to Ohio State. Nathaniel Marshall reminds me a lot of Jason Moore, man. Like this is that kid that is your prototype strong side defensive end that can impact the passing game and not just be a guy that, he can do all the dirty work, right? He's a big physical kid with long arms. He can lock out, can gain extension, set the edge, work through traffic. He can do all that type of stuff, right? But the explosiveness this kid has at already 6'4", already around 250 pounds. This kid's going to be 275, 280 pounds relatively early in his college career. And hopefully it's with Notre Dame,
Yes.
But he is explosive. He's powerful. He's strong. He has all the tools to be a dynamic difference maker at strong side defensive ends. And again, an Illinois kid, if Notre Dame wants Nathaniel Marshall, which I think they probably do, they need to be able to make a move with him and they need to close on him because there's no excuse to let that type of kid who, let's call it what it is, he looks like he should be playing SEC football, right? Like, couldn't you imagine him just playing at Georgia or Alabama or like one of those kids? You need to be able to close on that type of kid. Don't let him go anywhere but stay at home in the home base where at Notre Dame because he's that type of special athlete, in my opinion.
Yeah. Ryan, the interesting thing is only one of the services has even ranked this kid, and it's Rivals, who has him as a 3-star and the number 9 kid in the state of Illinois. I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
This guy is a straight up dude, in my opinion. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. He's the best player I've seen from the best defensive lineman I've seen from the state of Illinois, and that includes the Epinesa kid, who is a good player, but not as good as Nathaniel Marshall, in my opinion. Absolutely. He's an incredibly talented kid. Now, the key is going to be get him on campus this spring. You've got to get him on campus this spring. No doubt about it. There's another kid from Illinois, from Chicago, and that is Christopher Burgess from Simeon. Now, he's a public school kid, right? I believe Simeon's a public school. I'd have to. Sean would know. See, this is why I should have talked to Sean about that beforehand. Actually, no. Simeon is a public 4-year vocational. So it's a vocational school, but it is a public school. So it's a little bit of a different type of deal. Ryan, I liked him when I first saw him play, and we'll get into why. But you gave me a little nugget that makes me like him even more, which makes him a very intriguing prospect.
Yeah, apparently this past year was his first year ever playing football. He was an AAU basketball player. And when I spoke to him, Brian, he told me, because I was talking about his film, I was like, oh, man, a lot of great stuff on that film, a lot of upside, obviously. And he's like, oh, I appreciate you saying that. I'm going to be a whole lot better next year, though, because that was my first year playing football. I'm like, that's interesting, man.
Yeah.
So when you add that little context, you're like, oh, that kid doesn't even know what he's doing yet. And that's what's on film right now, right? It's like the hand usage is inconsistent. He doesn't really understand what his aiming points are, but that kid is long. That kid is explosive. That kid is upside. And the fact that he's only played 1 year of high school football, that is a huge indicator that the best is definitely down the road for a player like him.
I mean, the first thing that I said to you, Ryan, I said, look, I don't know what kind of player Christopher Burgess is going to be because he's so raw.
Yeah.
But I do know this. He's the first kid I'm having get off the bus. He looks like a bodybuilder. I mean, for a sophomore in high school.
I don't want to make this a weird conversation, but like you go on his profile on Twitter, he's got a 6-pack playing defensive end. Like, I mean, that's where we are, right? Like, that's kind of, yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, he is a really built up kid. The thing about him is you said he doesn't know what he's doing. He's making plays, and you're like, that was one of the worst technical plays I've ever seen. But he's just unblockable in those instances. Plays really high, doesn't understand pad level, doesn't really know how to use his hands. And so you're like, yeah, he's a big ball of clay. He's even more of a ball of clay than we saw about Deuce Knight. But it's just like, man, like, you think this kid how does he not learn that stuff by now? Then you find out this is the first year playing football, and it makes sense.
Yes.
And so you say, we'll get him another year of coaching at Simeon and maybe do some camps this summer. And you're talking about a kid that's going to explode next year. Yep. So when I saw that run, I was like, okay, I went from I like him, but I'm not sure about him yet to take him. I mean, take him. If this is his first year playing football, take him. Yep. Because he's got a burst off the line. You don't always see it because, again, I don't think he necessarily knows what he's doing yet. But when he stays low and comes off that line, right, he is really impactful. So raw player, projectable guy, but a kid that's got a ton of talent, in my opinion.
Another kid that I think has a very legit projection as a strong side defensive end. Like, I get some Boubacar Traore vibes with him a little bit, Brian. It's like explosive, powerful. It's just, again, Christopher Burgess has not been playing football very long. So, like, you'll watch him on film and you'll be like, he's on the front side of like an outside zone play. And like, you're like, why are your hands going to that aiming point? Like, why are you going there? But then he makes the play because he's just so strong and explosive. And it's like, you can't teach that stuff, right? I can teach him where to put his hands. I can teach him how to get off blocks more efficiently. I can teach those things, but I can't teach him to be 6'4", 240 plus pounds, built well, long arms, explosive. Like, I can't teach that, man. You either have that or you don't. So that gets me super excited. If I'm a defensive line coach, I'm like, give me Christopher Burgess and let me just evolve him into not a good football player, but a great football player. I think he has very high potential and very high upside. But again, it's one of those situations where, he's not a finished product. You're taking, I don't call it a gamble because he's a sophomore in high school, but like, there's projection that needs to happen here because he hasn't been playing football very long.
There's another defensive end from the state that he's an interesting player. That's Gabe Kaminsky. Let's just dive into Gabe Kaminsky from Nazareth Academy, which is the alma mater of Julian Love. Ryan, he's a guy like Christopher Burgess does things within 5-6 snaps or just like pop off at you, right? Nathaniel Marshall's like one of those guys. You watch 2-3 clips and you're like, oh, this is going to be fun. Gabe Kaminsky's a little different guy for me. And I'm just still not sure what he's going to be. There's some things I see that I like. There's some things that I'm like, okay, how good is he there? But then I got to remind myself, this is a sophomore. Yep. This is a kid who's 6'3", 215, sophomore. Those other two guys are powerful and smooth. I mean, powerful and explosive. Gabe's a little bit more kind of smooth and fluid than those guys are, Ryan. So that means he's not going to just jump out at you. But then you watch him play and you're like, man, this kid makes a lot of plays for a guy that doesn't blow me away on film. You know what I mean? So he's another guy that I'm very curious to see how he develops over the next couple of years. Probably more of a Viper right now that maybe could grow into a big end because he does have a frame with something to work on. But he didn't really catch my attention immediately like the other guys did. But the more you watch his film, you're like, man, this kid's a good football player in my view.
We call those types of players in the scouting world slow burn prospects because it's not like an immediate jumping off the screen, right? You're like, oh, he kind of stacks plays where you're like, oh man, that hand usage is pretty good there. Working in pursuit's pretty good. Like everything just kind of, there's a lot of boxes that I think Gabe Kaminsky checks, but maybe he's not elite in any one area, right? So like he doesn't really like get your attention right off the bat. But one thing I like about him, Brian, is that despite only being a sophomore and being 6'3", 215 pounds right now, his hand usage is really nice, man. Like he knows how to get off blocks. He uses his hands well at the top of the track. He's able to bend the outside track a little bit. There's decent hip flexion there. And then he's a true Viper right now, like you said, like an outside track type of dude because he's got that hand usage at the top of the arc. But that stuff is very advanced for his age, only being a sophomore in high school. I'm very interested to see him grow over the next couple of years, to your point, right? Does he grow another inch? Does he add 30 pounds? Does he put on good weight? Does he become a little bit more explosive? If he does, then we're cooking a little bit, right? Because he's got advanced hand usage and all that stuff for his age already. If he develops physically and he maintains obviously that technical prowess that he has at such a young age, then we're talking about I think he's a good football player, but like we're talking about then where he might explode on the recruiting trail because there is still room to grow. It's just about the development because I think we forget sometimes that this kid's probably 15 years old right now, right?
Right.
Like,
because I'm so used to I don't often watch sophomore films, so it's taken me a little sometimes to get used to be like, this kid's just a sophomore. This kid still has 2 whole years of high school football left. Yeah. Then when you think about that and you put it in a little bit better context, you're like, okay, this kid's got some stuff to work with. There's some tools to work with there. And that's what can be challenging about looking at sophomores, Ryan. Is not every kid's just going to explode off the screen like Taylor Taylor, like George McIntyre, like Bryce Underwood, like Nathaniel Marshall. And so you've got to there's a lot more projection involved with this one. I'm curious to see if they're able to get him on campus this spring. I know he's been on campus before. I believe he made at least one game visit this past year. I believe, Ryan. Didn't we have him on one of the visitor lists for a game?
I will double check.
I believe we did. So he's an interesting kid as well. Fifth defensive player we're going to talk about, the fourth defensive player that we're going to talk about of the 5 Illinois kids that got offers, Ryan, because we're talking about the 5 that got offers. There's other talented kids in the state of Illinois that haven't got offers yet. It's a really good year in the state of Illinois. And that's Dominic Hulak, who is a linebacker right now, Ryan, 6'3", 225. He's at the bottom of the list of the guys that we talked about from a talent standpoint, but there's some stuff to like about him as well. He's from Elmhurst, which is again outside of Chicago. He's a Catholic school kid, 6'3", 225. Has some Bo Bauer to his game. Not the greatest change of direction guy, but a really good downhill player. He's a thumper. Maybe he could be a 2-down Mike. Maybe he could grow into a Viper at some time, or maybe as he gets older, Ryan, he gets more explosive and a little bit more flexible and can stay at Mike. He's also a guy that plays tight end at that level. I don't know if he's a tight end at a place like Notre Dame, but he brings some similar positional versatility that a guy like Preston Zinter brought to the table. He's just, to me, not the athlete that Preston Zinter is, in my opinion. At least not yet. I never watched Preston's sophomore film. I'm just going off junior film. He's not the athlete Preston is, but man, you love the size and power that this kid brings to the table.
He's a physical kid, man. Downhill, explosive in short areas. I mean, like you said, Brian, though, he's 6'3", 225. That'd be really good as a senior in high school. Like that's a big kid. And I think that, some of those heights and weights are a little fudged at times, right? But I think that 6'3", 225 is like pretty legitimate. Like maybe he's not quite 6'3", but he's probably at least 6'2" and 220 pounds at this point at his age, it's a big linebacker, man. I think ultimately he might outgrow middle linebacker because, again, I mean, is he going to grow another inch? Is he going to gain another 20, 25 pounds? I think that stuff is possible, but he's a downhill player. I think he's physical. I think he's pretty instinctive too, which is nice to see. But I agree. I don't think that he's quite, as far as like change of direction, short area, quickness, the most quick kid of all time. But another very interesting football player because he is physically pretty advanced for a sophomore in high school. And he's got a lot of those physical traits where you look at it and you go, if he maintains that weight, gets a little more explosive, at worst, he's a role player potentially at the next level, and also maybe a great special teamer, if nothing else, right? Like he has that type of profile, but a very interesting player is only a sophomore, obviously.
So that's the 5 that got offers from Illinois on the Pot of Gold Day. I expect there to be some more offers from Illinois over time. I'm curious to see. There's a couple guys that didn't get offered. AJ Epinesa's little brother, Jalen Williams, is a really highly ranked kid, 6'6", 280-pound defensive tackle from the state. So I don't quite know why those guys didn't get offers. I'm sure there's reasons why. Hopefully there's reasons why. If they just kind of overlooked those guys like they overlooked Justin Scott, that'd be problematic. But I have to think, Ryan, that they are aware of them, because the one thing we notice about the Pot of Gold Day, you and I created a list, and on one side of the list was the offensive players, and the other side of the list was the defensive players, and the list of defensive guys was a whole lot. There was more defensive linemen and linebackers alone that got offered than in offense on the entire side. So the offensive staff has been a lot more selective right now, really going after high value, high caliber kids. The defensive staff seems to just be throwing a million offers out to 24 and 25 kids.
Which is really interesting that it seems to be two different strategies on one staff, right? Like, isn't that really interesting when you think about it? I mean, there was only, and I don't think that's a perfect example because Joe Rudolph has just gotten here recently, right? So like building a board takes time, but they only have 2 offensive line offers right now. They have a plethora of defensive line offers. They have 21 scholarship offers out to linebackers from the pot of gold. Like, to your point, man, 2 very different strategies on this staff for the pot of gold anyway.
Yeah. How many linemen linebackers did you say had been offered
21.
so far?
I think it was 21 on the list.
Yeah. And I think that defensive line is actually, let me look it up here.
It's close. Yeah.
It's 17. So you're talking 17. About 38 guys. The entire offensive, and there's only 29 total guys on offense.
Yeah,
that were offered on the pot of gold push. So you're seeing a big pitch. Peyton Joseph, I don't believe, got an offer on the pot of gold.
He had one previously, but he did not get offered during that.
No. Correct. The other kid that got offered the pot of gold is Avery Gack.
And he is a good player, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Good player.
Yeah. Another Michigan kid. Again, man, I'll tell you what, Ryan, here's something that I noticed. A couple observations that make me really fired up about how good the 2025 class can be. Thank you. Yep. Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, some really, really talented players on that board for Notre Dame to look at. So I'm really fired up to see that because you need that for Notre Dame to – people say, oh, can Notre Dame ever have a number 1 class? If there's a year where the North is loaded with highly ranked kids, then yes, that's the only chance they have. And you just don't often see – but take away the ranking part, there's some flat-out dudes from the North. We talked about Anthony Sacca the other day. Yep. There's Christian Jones from Nebraska. That guy doesn't run like most Nebraska linebackers, right? There's some flat-out dudes on the board from pro Notre Dame areas.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point, man. I think that, even – you're 100% right. We just went through all these Illinois players, obviously. You talk about a Bryce Underwood is obviously a Michigan guy. Pennsylvania is another one, Brian, this year. We're like, Pennsylvania's got some dudes now, man, especially in the Philadelphia area, like Sacca. I know the one defensive lineman that was offered from Notre Dame is a Philadelphia guy as well. I think he's a St. Joe Prep guy.
Was that Zahir Mathis?
That is Zahir Mathis, yeah. So Zahir Mathis is a Philadelphia kid. So is Anthony Sacca. Well, I think technically it's an outskirt, but anyway, he is Philadelphia. Pennsylvania, Illinois. The Midwest has some dudes as well. I mean, you mentioned Nebraska, obviously, with Christian Jones. Christian Jones is pretty dang good football player, man. There are some really, really good talent up north, it seems like, in the top in 2025. And in a lot more, like we talk about Tennessee a little bit, right? That's an area that Notre Dame needs to hit a little bit more in, right? The Carolinas are a spot that need to hit a little bit more in. There's some dudes.
And they're actually starting to have some success in the Carolinas. No question about it. Maryland, D.C. area is an area they have to start having more success with. It also appears to be a pretty good year. They offered a lot of kids from that area. So a lot of kids sort of at the Mason-Dixon line border, right around, right above and below it, and then definitely above. And that's a recipe for success for Notre Dame, in my opinion. And the interesting thing, Ryan, is, we've talked a lot about how important it is for Notre Dame to recruit the state of Missouri. Yep. And that was a state that I don't remember seeing any kids from in the pot of gold thing. So I'm curious to kind of where they are with that. Maybe it's just not as good of a year in Missouri as it has been in recent years, but a lot of offers going out to regional. No one from Indiana yet. So there's a lot
of Texas kids, like usual, as you would expect. Yeah.
the thing about like recruiting at Bama and Clemson, and I went through and I broke this down one time, and I think one of Clemson's championship teams, I think it was like 80% of their roster was from South Carolina, a state that borders South Carolina, or a state that borders South Carolina. Meaning you don't have to go very far to get like 80% of your roster.
Right.
Notre Dame usually can't afford to do that. The interesting thing about this year, Ryan, is there's, and this is kind of why that you're starting to see them start putting more emphasis on the state on like Missouri, for example. But if Notre Dame could get to the point where they could build a majority of their class from either states that border them or states that border a state that border them. So what does that mean for Notre Dame? It means Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia or West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Like those are all states that border Notre Dame or border a state that Notre Dame. And Virginia is just one state over. It borders West Virginia, which borders Ohio. And so that's the thing is if Notre Dame can just really start to hit home runs in that region, states that border you and states that border a state that borders you. But the reality is you can't do that if there aren't players from those states that are Notre Dame caliber kids. And Minnesota's in there too, but Minnesota just doesn't produce those kind of players yet, and they're not producing it right now. But there's some kids from Minnesota. Joe Alt, obviously, is from Minnesota. Michael Floyd is from Minnesota, but they're just not producing it like the other states are.
Yeah.
But the reality is that's unique about 24 and what we're seeing in 25 is there's a lot more northernish kids that are in those states that we discussed that Notre Dame should be going after and getting. And to a degree they are. CJ Carr is one. Yep. Cam Williams is one, right? Peter Jones is one. So we're starting to see more and more of that success. And then again, okay, so then we say, okay, well, those are the states, but then you kind of get into but then the states that border those states. And again, same thing, New Jersey. You add New Jersey into that conversation, and they've got a kid from New Jersey. So you look at it, the base states, which are the borders and those that border, and then can you branch out? So right now, if you look at Notre Dame's 8-man class, which is right now, I believe, Ryan, still a top 5 class in 2025, I believe. Rivals has it number 3.
Yep.
So we'll go with that. Rivals has it number 3. And you look at it, and you got Peter Jones, Carson Hobbs, Aeneas Williams, CJ Carr, and Cam Williams. 5 of their 8 are from border states or states that border a border state.
Right.
That's huge. That's huge. And the great thing about the 25 class, Ryan, it looks like it's going to continue that, especially in Illinois. And so that's something to get you pretty fired up about their chances of really stocking the roster up the next 2 years.
And it does not look like a very strong year in Indiana. But to your point, Brian, the neighboring states outside of Indiana do seem incredible. I mean, there's even a couple of guys in Ohio this year where, like, they seem pretty pro Notre Dame early on. Like Dorian Brew's a guy that speaks very highly of Notre Dame right now. And, so even some Ohio kids, I think, could be in the conversation. Michigan, we mentioned Andrew Gack or Gotch, however you pronounce his last name, who's a dude at offensive tackle. Mentioned Pennsylvania. You mentioned, there is some talent to work with here, man. Missouri it doesn't look like it's the highest that it has been over the last couple of years, but still there's definitely a lot of ballers in the 2025 class up north, which will definitely help, obviously, for Notre Dame's mission. Because, I mean, Brian, if you could recruit a large base of players there in a strong year, and then you go down once or twice to Texas, once to California, once to somewhere else in the Midwest, it's maybe a little bit more out of reach. Maybe you go to Oklahoma. There's a couple Oklahoma kids that were offered on Friday as well. Like maybe you go touching Oklahoma or somewhere like that. But to your point, in order for Notre Dame to contend for that number 1 recruiting slot, if that ever does happen, it has to be a year that it looks especially strong in the North. And this year, 2025, does kind of look like it might be that case. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. That wraps up the recruiting portion, Ryan. Before we move on to the team stuff, please, folks, do us a favor. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Make sure you've signed up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So spring ball, Ryan, you mentioned it. Spring ball starts in a couple days. I'm excited about spring ball starting. I'm really fired up about spring ball starting. We've had a lot of drama this offseason. There's been a lot of negativity.
Yep.
With things that happened with the whole Andy Ludwig situation. Matt Luke turns Notre Dame down, which followed the fact that Harry Heastand retired, which was a major bummer. Brian Mason leaves. And it just, you lose Brandon Hillman. There's just been a lot of bad news, basically, for Notre Dame. And so the perception is that this has not been a great offseason. That can start to change Wednesday. Because at the end of the day, I wrote an article yesterday, Ryan, and we can debate this maybe on another show. Maybe this might be a conversation for tomorrow, but the premise was, if you take out all of the process that got you to where you are, I think I made a case that the coaching staff as a whole is actually better now than it was a year ago. From the standpoint of Chancey Stuckey's better than he was a year ago. I expect Dylan McCullough to be better. Al Washington. I mean, so all the second-year coaches you expect to be better. They know the players better. The players know them better. And then they were able to kind of add some good coaches and things like that. So, that's the case that I made. So for all the negativity, I do think that can be viewed as a positive. Marcus Freeman's going into year 2. But more so than that, Ryan, this is a really talented roster, in my opinion. And that's what I'm looking forward to seeing. And then you've got the new guys, Sam Hartman, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Thomas Harper, Caleb Smith, the kickers, Saunders. You've got the punter coming in from Penn. There's some new guys that add some really exciting aspects to this, to where if you didn't land any of the transfers, I'm still pretty excited about this roster. But then you throw these guys into the mix, Ryan. A lot of early enrollees from what you and I thought was I don't know if you feel this way. What I thought is Notre Dame's best recruiting class since 2013. In my view, I don't care what the rankings say. I'm just telling you, looking at that group of players, I have not seen a better class top to bottom than since 2013. I'm excited about this team. I mean, they got a ton of guys coming back, and there's going to be some really interesting storylines that are going to happen with this team. And I think offensively is where we're going to start, Ryan, is I'm just really curious to see what are we talking about by the end of the spring.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that makes the spring so much fun.
It always does, man, because I think that you have expectations, obviously, going into the spring, right, Brian? I think most Notre Dame fans are looking at this offense, especially, and saying, like, hey, man, the main storylines, right, are the new guys. That's what you want to see. That's what you always want to see. Sam Hartman coming in, and maturation of wide receivers that you didn't see as much last year. And who's the guy to kind of take that conversation piece to another level? But I think that ultimately that trajectory sometimes doesn't always hit fruition, right? Like, we might enter the spring and say, Sam Hartman's the guy I want to see. But coming out of the spring, you're like, there's a different storyline that really kind of encapsulates the spring for Notre Dame. So I agree completely, man. I think that's the greatest thing about it, is that every single year, no matter who the coach is, no matter what program you cover, there's always players that surprise you every single year. I wasn't talking about player X going into the spring. Leaving spring, he's probably going to start. He's probably going to be a substantial playmaker. Maybe this guy that you thought was going to be that dude didn't take a step forward and wasn't that type of guy. But hey, you have other guys that were competing with him, and they took a step forward. Maybe a guy doesn't, maybe a whole position group did not take a step forward. Maybe a whole position group did take a step forward. That's the most fun about spring ball for me, is that you have expectations going in, but there's always surprises. It's never as you expect. It is always a different conversation when the end of it comes.
You just hope that those surprises are good surprises. Right. It's not, wow, I expect this guy to be a whole lot better than he was. I think the first storyline for me, Ryan, that's worth discussing this spring is the coaching staff. And I think when you look at the offense, this is the second year in a row that the offensive staff is going to look a lot different. Sure. But the interesting thing is, last year it was a brand new coaching staff outside of Tommy Rees. Now, yes, Harry Hiestand had been here before, but the last time Harry Hiestand was here, there was like 5 guys from last year's roster on the team. Like, that was it. It was a different team, different era. He was new. He had to get to know Marcus Freeman and all the other coaches. He's gone. Tommy's gone. Just left 3 coaches coming back from last year. So you actually have more returning coaches to this year's offensive staff than you had going into last year's offensive staff. But because it's a new coordinator, because it's a new O-line coach, the new quarterbacks coach, these are premium positions on offense. And I think that's where some of the angst goes. But I'm very curious to see how this dynamic plays, because on the one side, it's definitely a positive that Marcus Freeman went out and surrounded Jared Parker with 2 veteran. I mean, Gino Guidugli's not a veteran per se. I mean, he hasn't been coaching that long, but he's rose up the ranks pretty quickly. He's got experience at what Jared Parker's being asked to do. He's called plays for 2 years now. He was a guy that was the full-time OC in 2022 for Cincinnati, and his experience coaching quarterbacks and playing quarterback at a high level in college football. So I'm very curious to see how that dynamic goes, because on the flip side, you have two guys that have been coordinators that are now working under a guy that's never really been a full-time coordinator.
Sure.
And so how that goes, how that mesh happens between Coach Gaduli and Coach Rudolph and Coach Parker, and with Coach Stuckey and Coach McCullough with those guys, because now it's a whole new dynamic. How are they going to work together? That's something I'm interested in seeing, because if this staff meshes quickly, then I think the offense really takes off quickly during the spring. If they don't mesh quickly, then we may not see the offense really find its stride until the fall. So I think that's going to be an interesting aspect in a storyline that I'm going to be talking about and focusing on in the few practices that we get this spring.
You know why I know I'm weird, right? One thing that I'm so intrigued about is I kind of just want to watch Jared Parker. I just want to watch his mannerisms. I want to watch him, how he engages with the players as an offensive coordinator versus what he was as a tight end coach. I just kind of want to observe what the teaching looks like. I know that sounds really strange because we all just want to talk about the players and being player centric and what is this guy looking like? How is he developing? And that stuff's all important to me as well. But it's just such a unique position because we have high expectations for what this offense can be. You know why? Because there's a lot of talent there, right? So when you have a lot of talent, the key there is the people calling the plays, the people developing these players on a day in and day out perspective. And I'm really interested to see how Gino Gaduli interacts with that quarterback room on a day-to-day basis. What does that look like? I'm interested to see how much different the offensive line practices run with Coach Rudolph comparative to Coach Easton. I'm interested to see what Coach Parker, what the vibe is, what the energy is around the offensive staff. So I know it sounds really lame. I know it sounds really weird, but I honestly just want to be at a practice and watch Coach Parker and just watch his every move to see how does he interact with each position group? How does he run a practice? What's the tempo? All that type of stuff I think is going to be a big indicator of how good this offense can be. Because like you said before, Brian, I agree with it 100%. This is where the baseline's being built, right? This is the foundation. This isn't 100% identity. But part of the identity that I think you need this spring is to understand player interactions, how practices are run, what the expectations are, what the tempo is. That's type of stuff that I think needs to be really solidified this spring and to be shown and to be understood. And that's honestly one of my biggest takeaways this spring is that I want to see what is the energy around these coaches, how do they run a practice, how crisp, how demanding, all those key things, because I think that could take this team from being a very talented and good offense to being one of the better offenses in college football. I think they have the type of upside. It really does depend a lot on what are the coaches and what is the development this spring as it starts now going into the further into the offseason. That's kind of the biggest thing that I want to see.
Well, I think the build on top of the mesh part, Ryan, is kind of what you were getting into. What are the changes we're going to see? Changes are going to come in twofold that are going to be important, Ryan, right? Number one is what you talked about. How are they structure practice differently? What's the impact that change of structure is going to have on the team? Do they push tempo more? Do they do more teaching? Do they?
Yep.
Is there more? I don't know. And change doesn't equal better. It doesn't equal worse. It's just change, and then we'll see what the results are, right? And so then I want to see what things that they do that are different, and what of those things really seem to work or not. And then the other part is you could take Tommy Rees's playbook. Right? Let's just say the Notre Dame playbook that Tommy Rees had, hand it to Jared Parker and say, run this, and it's still going to look different because every coach within the same playbook is going to have different points of emphasis. Yeah, Tommy Rees ran a mess of duo, but we saw inside zone and some other things, whereas they may still run the same plays, but the structure of how they run them, the volume with which they run certain things or not, is going to be different. Could be different, I should say. They're going to run the same pass concepts, but they may overemphasize this relative to where they were, or maybe add some new wrinkles. So that's another part of this too, Ryan, is I want to see what the differences are. What changes does Jared Parker and this new coaching staff make? Gino Gaduli is going to come in with some pass concepts that he really likes, that he thinks could work here. Does Jared Parker take those? Does they implement those? Does Chancey Stuckey now in year 2 maybe have a little bit more say on some of that stuff? Hey, these are my guys. These are what they do well. Here's some things we can do with them. Does Jared Parker, is he receptive to that? Are there some ideas maybe he had for certain concepts that he thinks that he likes as a former receiver and receivers coach? Does Joe Rudolph have any influence on what the run game is going to look like? Those are all things that we have no clue what the answer is, Ryan. But those are going to be storylines that I'm going to be following and keeping a very close eye on as we get into the spring.
Yeah, it's going to be. I mean, it's really fun because because even Brian, like it's even as simple as like on the offensive side of the ball from a coaching perspective, it's like you have new coaches that are in new positions, obviously, right? Like so that's where like the headlines are going to go, right? It's like Jared Parker. What does an offense under Jared Parker look like? What does the energy around an offense under Jared Parker look like? I mentioned Joe Rudolph compared to what Harry Hiestand like to do with the offensive line, but I'm even interested to see a second spring under Dela McCullough, a second spring under Chancey Stuckey. Does it look different at all with a new offensive coordinator? Do they inflect a little bit more of their personality into their teaching? There's so many cool storylines on the offensive side of the football. And I mean, honestly, man, like the Notre Dame not graphic design, but their Notre Dame media departments, whatever they call that area of it, right? Like how much cool stuff, videos and pictures can they get this spring with like Sam Hartman being the guy there, right? With the coaches engaging, with the coaches teaching, a gold mine of opportunity to really give some insight into what an offense looks like under Notre Dame heading into 2023. Again, I'm not asking for like the secret sauce to like what it's going to look like, but like you have a lot of storylines and a lot of opportunity to be really engaging with Notre Dame fans, which I also think is really interesting and something that I hope Notre Dame takes advantage of a little bit, man. Like I want to know Sam Hartman on a personal level, you know? I want to know Jared Parker on a personal level. I want to know these guys, man. I think it's great content potentially for Notre Dame as well.
If Notre Dame doesn't produce at least a couple minute long mic'd up video, and not this 30-second stuff that gives you a little bit of fluff, and then like you're not giving the fans anything there. If you're not doing at least a couple minute long, and I mean, I would do like full blown productions a few times, but I don't think you can do that every single practice. But like at least a couple minute long mic'd up video on Twitter and on YouTube of every practice. And you have a coach mic'd up at a practice. You have some certain players mic'd up. You know, like I would love to see, like you said, Sam Hartman mic'd up. A day in the life of, Notre Dame's quarterbacks. And maybe you follow him and Tyler around. Like there are so many things like that Notre Dame needs to be doing this spring and into the summer that they're just not doing, that I think would give great exposure to the football program, but then to these players. And then, bring the fans in. I don't know if they're going to do that. I have my doubts. I don't think Notre Dame takes that stuff super seriously. When they do put out stuff, it's really quality. That's the disappointing thing, is when they actually take the time to make those things, Ryan, it's excellent. It's really excellent. They just don't do it enough. And I don't think they prioritize it enough. And so those are things that I want to see, Ryan. But even more importantly, that's great storylines, but the practicality, what the results are, is going to be important. And that leads into storyline number 3, the quarterback position.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always a big story, but there's so many different layers. Like, is it really a competition or not? How quickly will Sam Hartman adjust? How quickly do the players get comfortable with Sam Hartman? How is Tyler Buckner going to perform? Can he make a jump? Will he get better? Is he going to be bought in? Will he stay if he doesn't start? There's just, how's Steve Angeli going to develop in year 2? What's Kenny Minchie going to look like? Is he going to be on a pitch count this spring as he comes back from the shoulder injury? There are so many dynamics. What's the offense going to look like with Sam Hartman? Are they going to have a Tyler Buckner package? There's so much at quarterback that's just unknown, but also, man, really exciting because there's legit 1-2 talent at quarterback that we haven't really seen since 2016, in a situation where you actually think more than one kid might have a shot to play, in my view. Like, this is way better than the dynamic of Ian Book and Phil Dracovic.
Right.
Because, I mean, Tyler's somewhat on the same level of what Phil was then, but Sam Hartman's a much more talented player than Ian Book, in my opinion.
Well, I want to see interactions around the quarterback position too, Brian. Like, I want to see Coach Gaduli, Coach Parker. Am I putting these guys into a lot of adverse situations in the spring, right? To see how they tick, what type of competitors they are. Because if they do that, then I'm automatically like, oh, this is a legit competition. Like, they are trying to breed competition. I want to see what makes Sam Hartman tick. I want to see in a 2-minute drill the pressure put on him. And then guess what? Next play, Tyler, you're in, brother, and let's see you in a 2-minute, and let's see what you look like in that adverse situation. So I'm interested to see the interactions there. I'm also interested to see what the interactions are between the quarterbacks on the roster, right? It's like Sam Hartman has the type of experience where Tyler Buchner can really benefit off of just being around him, right? But is Tyler open to that? I don't know that conversation. I don't know. I hope, I think, but at the end of the day, it's up to Tyler Buchner to take the most out of that opportunity to learn from Sam Hartman, because you could still fight for the starting spot and still understand that, like, hey, that guy's played more football than me. He's seen more than me. He can probably help me out on some of the mental side of the game, or at least, for preparation stuff. Like, you can do that. And then do you push the most to get out of Sam Hartman? Do you push the most to get out of Tyler Buchner? I'm really interested in just what the general vibe is around those quarterbacks. Because to your point, Brian, Sam Hartman has a big reputation behind him, for what he's done the last 2 years at Wake Forest and during his Wake Forest career in general. He's got records. He's got a good resume. Is he driven to be even better than what it was at Wake Forest? Or is he just complacent and just like, yeah, I was good, man, but that's just, I'm going to continue what I'm doing? Or does he know that there's a step forward there that needs to be taken? Tyler Buchner, the ability to get better each and every day and match a guy like Sam Hartman and the resume that he has. Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey continue to get better each and every day. There's a bunch of individual storylines kind of interwoven together, but at the end of the day, we know that a big difference that needs to be happen in this Notre Dame program moving forward to go from a good program to a great one and then to an elite one and championship level one is that the quarterback position needs to be better. It just needs to be. It needs to be more consistent, needs to be on a week-to-week basis, more dependable. You need that type of competition, I think, in the room. Having Gino Guidugli now every day to be that quarterback coach, which is something that we haven't seen in an individual basis in a couple years, obviously, with the separation between quarterback coach and offensive coordinator. A lot of great storylines. And I'm more than anything, I'm just looking how much do each one of these players push each other in that room. Because I think that competition needs to happen this spring, because that makes Sam better, makes Tyler better, makes the depth better. And that is really, I think, what I'm most interested in, is just see how those players interact with one another and interact with the coaches that are with them on a daily basis, obviously.
When this all builds, right, Ryan, it's coaching and scheme and quarterbacks. Well, then what's next? What playmakers are going to step up on the perimeter? That's another big conversation, because right now, Ryan, you and I are excited about the talent and potential of the wide receivers. But when you have to use the word potential as much as you and I use the word potential with this receiving core, it means it hasn't arrived yet. Yes. It means the production isn't there, right? After 2014, we weren't talking about Will Fuller's potential. We were talking about his production, what he had proven to be, and then he got even better that next year. Right now, we don't know what this group is going to be. We know the talent level. We've seen some small flashes from a lot of these guys, but we don't know what all of them can bring on a week-to-week basis, on a day-to-day basis in the spring. I'm very curious to see that. Does Lorenzo Styles have a better spring than he had last year? Does Tobias Merriweather start to kind of step up and emerge? Does Dion take that next step? How quickly does Caleb Smith fit in with the group? How quickly do the freshmen fill in? And what kind of role does Jaden Thomas take? Because I could see Jaden Thomas and Caleb Smith being sort of the two, let's say, leaders of the receiving core. And right. As far as like how they go about their business on an everyday basis. So, and more importantly, Ryan, at the end of the day, who steps up as the playmakers? And can you go out against this group of defensive backs, even if Cam Hart's not playing a ton, and can you make plays? Because it won't be easy. And how quickly do those players step up and say to Sam Hartman, hey, I'm your guy. Get me the ball. Throw me the ball. And those are things that I'm really curious to see, is who steps up. And hopefully it's not just one person. Hey, Jaden Thomas had a great spring. Hey, Tobias Merriweather had a great spring. Hey, where it's just one guy. I want to hear like, man, I don't know who's going to start next year, because Tobias balled out. Lorenzo looked like 2021 late season Lorenzo. Dion balled out. Caleb Smith is the real deal. Jaden Thomas kept build. Man, Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores are like the truth as freshmen. I don't know who's going to get the ball, man. Like, that's what I'm looking forward to seeing, is who steps up at that position. Those are very exciting things.
How many times this offseason have we had the conversation, and people pose this question all the time too? Who do you expect to be the guy at wide receiver? Who do you expect to be the main producer at wide receiver? And the answer is that there's a few guys that it could be. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Deion Colsey's the dude for Notre Dame. Wouldn't be surprised if Tobias Merriweather's the dude for Notre Dame. Wouldn't be surprised if Jaden Thomas is the dude for Notre Dame. I wouldn't be confident that this will happen, but I wouldn't be shocked if Lorenzo Styles had a bounce back year. Like I wouldn't be shocked about that because he's certainly talented. But at the end of the day, Brian, when you have so many options, what does the options actually mean though? It means that there's not a foregone conclusion. There's not an easy answer to that conversation. There's a lot of cool conversation pieces though, because there are so many different options. That's great. And we're going to be talking all offseason about 6'4" Tobias Merriweather, 6'5" Deion Colsey, Lorenzo Styles, who's very talented, 6'2", 215, Jane Thomas, who's your best receiver at the end of the season. A lot of cool things that you can get excited about.
You just mentioned 4 guys and didn't mention the only guy on the roster that was an all-conference player last year in Caleb Smith.
Sure.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm not saying that to criticize you. No. I'm saying, like, you just mentioned 3 talented football players. You didn't mention Lorenzo Styles, who we expected to be their number 1 receiver last year. You didn't mention Caleb Smith, who was an all-conference player last year.
Who's also
that's the point in a receiving core that had 2 guys that were top 100 recruits, right? You didn't mention any of those guys. And that's the exciting thing. But it's also the question mark, because who is going to be that guy?
And I mean, it even could be a situation where if players don't take steps up, it's like Caleb Smith is the most dependable guy, right? Because he's played so much football. I mean, and he's 6'2", 220 pounds. So, like, I don't want to sell Caleb short and be like he's not talented. Like, he's 6'2", 220 and has a really good catch radius, extends for the football well.
So 18 yards a catch last year with a terrible quarterback.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention the fact that, Braylon James might be the most gifted wide receiver on the roster. Like, he has a conversation there. Jaden Greathouse.
Nobody produced in high school the way the next kid you're going to talk about produced.
Yeah, no, Jaden Greathouse is, historically, Brian, like Austin Westlake in Texas is one of the premier programs in all of high school football. Well, there's a good argument that Jaden Greathouse is one of the best to ever strap up a Westlake helmet on, man. Like, he's that type of football player. 50 career touchdowns, was a part of a 53-game winning streak, 3 state championships in 6A ball in the state of Texas. I wouldn't be shocked if Jaden Greathouse led the spring as a guy that needs to play in 2023. Like, I wouldn't be shocked at all because he is nuanced, he's athletic, he's strong, and I not even mentioning Rico Flores, who also did all he did at a program like Folsom High School in California.
We could do this all day. We can talk about
littered
with
with talent.
This guy. What about that guy? The storyline, however, Ryan, is who?
Exactly.
Who becomes that guy, or who becomes those guys? That's even more important. Yeah. That's the more important thing. And who does Tyler Buckner and Sam Hartman develop the most trust with? And here's the thing. We didn't even get into the tight ends. How they're going to use the running backs out of the backfield. There's so much potential for this pass game, Ryan. I'm excited. I really am. I don't know if we're going to see it necessarily really take off early in the spring. Like, timing, pass game takes time to get on the same page. So it's not, if it comes out the first couple open practices and they're just lighting the world on fire, you're like, okay, this is going to be really good. I don't necessarily expect that. I think we'll see flashes of it, but I'm really curious to see who steps up. And then finally, kind of the last storyline we'll discuss is the one true position battles. Because the reason that's different is I don't think quarterback's really a battle right now. I think it's Sam Hartman's job to lose. Receiver, you could say there are battles, and there are, tight end, but they're all going to play, right? Like, they're not just, okay, well, you're starting boundary, the other guy's never going to play. Offensive line's a different animal because usually the starter's that's the guy you're going with. And so both guard spots are open, Ryan, and how well the guys that win and earn those jobs play is going to go a long way towards determining just how good this offensive line is going to be, because it's got a chance to be special. But you can't have a great line if you're not really good up the middle. And right now there's 2 huge question marks at the 2 guard spots. And it could just be guys step in, they play great, you keep rolling. But if you have problems, and we saw this with Sam Mustipher, for example, in 2016, I felt that Sam really struggled that year. And because he had to worry so much about the right guard position. It was such a problem. and that he settled in when it got better. We saw this in 2021 with Jarrett Patterson, where early in the year, I thought Jarrett struggled because he was worried about both. Zeke was struggling at left guard. Kane Madden was an issue at right guard. But once Andrew Kristofic kind of came in at left guard, and Kane Madden he knew what he was doing at least. Then Jarrett Patterson started playing better because he didn't have to worry as much about what's going on next to him. And I think that's an interesting thing, too, because if the guards don't play well, then that could end up dragging Zeke Correll down as the center because he's got to worry about so much. So we don't talk about it as much. It's not as sexy as the quarterback talk or the coaching staff or the receivers or the whatever. But, man, it is a very important battles that are going to be raging at both guard spots. And I'm curious to see who steps up this spring and says, this is my job. Or does anyone step up this spring? Or do a couple guys play so well that you're like, man, this battle's going to have to go into the fall because these guys both played like starters at right guard, and they both played like starters at left guard. You kind of actually hope a little bit that it's the latter, to be completely honest with you, Ryan, that multiple guys step up and they make themselves better. And then we go into the fall thinking, well, I think Billy Schrauth is going to be the guy, but did you watch Ty Chan, or did you watch Rocco, or did you see Sam, or did you see Carmody, or did you, that kind of thing. And so I'm very curious to see how that battle is going to rage, because it's not sexy, but it's a very important position battle that's going to happen this spring.
And with any battle, with any competition, the worst case scenario is that someone wins it by default. Like, you never want that, right? You never want guys to just kind of be on the save level, but like not a level where you're just like everyone's getting better and everyone's really taking a step forward. It's just like everyone's just fine, right? Like, you don't want that to be the case. And this is a similar conversation to the wide receiver talk, I think, Brian. I mean, you have a litter of very talented interior offensive linemen that could potentially be that guard. But at the end of the day, two guys need to step up because there's going to be two starting guards. There's going to be. Could there be three guys that play? I mean, sure. We can have that conversation at some point. But at the end of the day, when the game kicks off in Dublin against Navy in a few months, there are going to be two starting guards on the field for Notre Dame. And there's a lot of names to work through. Billy Schrauth, Ty Chan, Rocco Spindler, Andrew Kristofic, Michael Carmody. A lot of Sam Pendleton, a lot of talented players. There's no doubt. But to your point about the wide receivers, we're talking so much about potential because none of those guys are the guy yet. And it's not all their fault. You had obviously a couple of veteran guys playing guard last year. But is this the year that Billy Schrauth takes a massive step forward? Is this the year where Andrew Kristofic puts it all together? Those are the questions that we're kind of working through. It's very important because, Brian, I would say that like the guard position could be the difference between being a good to very good offensive line and being an elite one. Like, that could be the difference because you expect a potential All-American at left tackle. You expect a good to very good starting center. You expect a very good starting right tackle. The difference is there a hole in this offensive line, or are you just at least solid across the board at every single spot and then great in a couple different attributes?
Because if you're solid at guard this year, Ryan, this whole line's going to be filthy. I mean, it is, because there aren't many teams that are just great across the board. 100%. There aren't. Michigan's offensive line the last 2 years has not been great at all five positions. As a matter of fact, I'd say they haven't really been great really anywhere, to be honest. Like, there's not like one lineman that I think Michigan had that was just like, oh my gosh, that guy was outstanding. There's nobody as good for them as like Broderick Jones was for Georgia, or Mike McGlinchey, or Liam Eichenberg, or Ronnie Stanley, or guys like that. There was nobody like that. It's just as a group, they play great together.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the center was an All-American caliber kid. I don't think either one of the tackles were great.
No.
I think Zach Zenter's a really good football player, but he's not elite.
I mean, you saw it at the Senior Bowl, Brian. It's like, yeah, Ryan Hayes is a good left tackle for Michigan, but then you get him kind of isolated in that type of situation. You're like, oh, he's not that great. Like, he's just a solid player, right? I mean, I would say Zach Zinter was probably the best one, in my opinion, on that offensive line the last 2 years. But, I mean, to your point, it's not like he's not like a slam dunk All-American, right? He's a very good player.
He's more Alex Bars than he is Quentin Nelson as a player. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah.
But that line as a whole is outstanding.
They play really well together.
Outstanding offensive line, and that's the key. The guards don't have to be great for this to be a great offensive line. They just need to do your job consistently, effectively, and then the studs can take over at that point in time.
100%.
And that's what you start getting excited about. So Ryan, that's going to do it for this portion of the show. It was a fun discussion. I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing what this offense is going to look like, and we're going to get our first glimpse on Wednesday. Just so you all know, kind of understand the schedule. We'll talk about the defense and some other topics tomorrow. Notre Dame is going to have a practice on Wednesday at 7:55 a.m. I will be there. We'll get the stretch period and then the first 5 periods. So we'll discuss that in our Wednesday show at 1 o'clock. We'll just do our show on Wednesday at normal time, and we'll recap the practice then. That way we'll have I'll have my breakdowns done. I'll do sort of my typical practice recap, just kind of break down what I saw. And then we'll have another practice available on Saturday. We'll be able to see the practice on Saturday. I'll be at Pro Day on Friday as well. So we'll talk a lot about that stuff this week. I know Ryan, at least one day this week, is going to take over the Ivy Nation Sports Talk show and preview Pro Day. I'm not sure which day that is. We'll definitely let you guys know. If you didn't see it, Ryan did a mock draft, which was really fun. That was good stuff, Ryan. I was just reminded me of also why I'm so sad about this year's draft, because I'm like, when are they going to get to the Broncos? I'm like, oh, that's right. They're not doing a 3-round draft, so we're not going to get to the Broncos. But it was really, really well done. You can find that on the CFB Nation channel. So you definitely want to make sure you subscribe and check that out as well. It was really, really well done. So hit that like button, folks. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Don't go anywhere, because we got the mailbag coming up next. So start throwing your questions in for that. But we're going to have a lot of spring talk this week. We'll mix in some recruiting stuff this week as well, because I know we'll have some guys on campus this weekend. Obviously, Justin Scott announced that he'll be on campus this weekend, which is huge. He'll be there, kind of on the Pro Day, which I think is Friday. No, he'll be on there Saturday. So when they have a practice on Saturday, so we'll see him this weekend. So a lot of recruiting stuff still to come as well. So but again, Ryan, that's why you need to be locked into the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Definitely want to check that out as well. It's mailbag time, Mr. Roberts, and we've got a few questions here. If you all have more questions, go ahead and throw them in now. But we have about 14 right now that we'll get into first. So I want to begin with Sean Green.
And his question is, missed Friday's mailbag. So I didn't get to ask this, but what's your thoughts on Julian Love? I almost said Jeremiah Love. Julian Love signing with the Seattle Seahawks. As a Giants fan, I'm pretty bummed. He had a good season for us last season.
So Ryan, let me say this. The reason I had you read that question is because I just kind of skimmed the questions. And if it's a question about the NFL draft, I'll read it so that way Ryan can answer it. Oh, I saw J Love, and I just assumed it was about Jeremiah Love. So that's my bad. I should have read it and kicked the question to you. But was it 2 years, $12 million?
2 years, 12.
So
yep.
I want to kind of add on to this. Number one is, what did you think about what he got contract-wise? And then what do you think about his fit with the Seahawks? What are your thoughts on that pickup?
I was actually surprised that Julian didn't get a little bit more, because, I mean, to Sean Green's point, played really well with the Giants this year, man. He was their leading tackler. He can play a little bit in the slot. He played from depth. He does a lot of things for that Giants defense. He had a couple interceptions, a few pass breakups. Julian, I mean, for a while there, Brian, like towards near the end of the season, you're like, Julian Love might make a Pro Bowl here. Like, it's possible. He's at least in the conversation piece as a safety position. He didn't end up making a Pro Bowl, but like regardless, he had a really nice season. He kind of had a breakout in 2021, but like 2022 was by far his best year. So going into that contract year, you're like, man, like after the contract ends, obviously you're like, man, he might get a little bit of money here. You know, I was expecting more in like the $9-10 million a year type of range. He only gets $6 million a year, which is, I mean, still good money, right? Like I'm talking about $6 million like it's nothing, right? But I think that the Seattle Seahawks got a great deal with Julian Love. I am the one good thing I think about Julian's deal is that if he has 2 good years now, he still has another contract that he can cash in on, right? So it's not like he's locked into like a 5-year at like $6 million a year where he might not be able to get to a next contract. I think that the Seattle Seahawks got an absolute steal out of this one. I think Julian Love is perfect for what Pete Carroll likes to do on the defensive side of the football. He wants to play a lot of too high looks at pre-snap, but then really move guys around a little bit. And I think that's really the biggest thing about Julian's game that is so underrated is that Julian can play nickel. Like he can come down and play in the slot. He can rotate to middle of the field. He can play too high and in quarters and halves and do all that type of stuff as far as being a versatile piece. So I think he's a really good fit in Seattle. I think that they're going to like him. He's a good football player, man, and he can do a lot of things for defense. So I think he's a really nice fit with Seattle, honestly.
Good stuff. Here we got one. Let's go next, Ryan. Here we go.
Timeout Tom says, please explain Eric Lindstrom's commitments. That's the 2023 walk-on that just announced last week.
There's nothing to explain. He didn't have the Division I offers that he wanted. He had a chance to come to Notre Dame as a walk-on, and Notre Dame took him, and it's a quality walk-on. I mean, again, he's not to the level as like Luke Talich. We talked about this on Friday. He's not to the level like Luke Talich or like a Jordan Faison or even Henry Garrity. Like those are, to me, legitimate Division I caliber athletes that Notre Dame got as walk-ons, especially Luke Talich. I mean, he's a legit Power 5 athlete. Whereas I think like Jordan Faison, like if Jordan Faison would have got a scholarship from Florida Atlantic or South Florida, I wouldn't have been shocked at all. He's that kind of athlete, in my opinion. If Henry Garrity would have got a scholarship to Indiana or a Purdue, or at the very least, like he'd be one of the best players in the class at several MAC schools, right? Well, Notre Dame getting kids like that is big, and part of the reason he didn't get more offers is because he's Pat Garrity's kid, and everybody's kind of assumed he was going to go to Notre Dame. I mean, I think that hurt his offer opportunities. But I think he still would have gone to Notre Dame. Like that's a legitimate Division I caliber player. To me, Eric Lindstrom strikes me more as a FCS caliber kid, Ryan, a really good FCS caliber kid that maybe can grow into a Power 5 type of guy, in my opinion. But more of a good program guy that is a tough kid, decent frame. Kid that you really say, boy, that guy makes us better on Saturdays because he gives us everything he's got Monday to Friday.
Yeah.
And this isn't me trying to think of how to say this right. This isn't me like patronizing walk-ons. I believe that from the bottom of my heart. If your prep team is not giving you a great look effort-wise, talent-wise, and all that, you're not going to be quite as prepared as you otherwise could be on a Saturday. And it's a little different at the Division III level because we could have so many more kids than the Division I kids have. But I mean, there were some teams I was on, Ryan, like when it was at Christopher Newport, I'd say probably 7 of the 10 games we played that year, those years, Saturday was like, we're not facing athletes on Saturday like we face in practice every day. Just not. And that's how it was with USC back in the day. That's how it is with Alabama, where it's like, dude, your scout team's giving you a better look than Vanderbilt is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the reality of it. And it's not just scholarship kids, it's walk-ons. And now what makes it harder to walk on at Notre Dame is Alabama can take some really good, like, UAB caliber guy and bring him in as a walk-on. He's paying what, $13,000-$14,000 a year. He's getting in-state grants here, in-state grants there because he's an in-state kid. But Notre Dame, it's $60,000-$70,000.
Shit.
There's no in-state, rate for that
kid. And you have to get into school too. So
there you go, because they can't pull strings to get you into school. So it is tough to put together a walk-on situation like Notre Dame is, which again speaks volumes to the job that Chad Bowden and his crew did to be able to bring in the Luke Taliches and the guys that they brought in. It's a really impressive walk-on group. And I'm not saying that in a patronizing manner at all. That is huge for Notre Dame. I mean, I when I'm thinking of Notre Dame's 23 class, Ryan, I actually think in my head Luke Talich is part of the class. I do.
Seriously.
I know he's not on scholarship, but when I talk about evaluating the 2023 class, I evaluate it as he's part of that class. I do. He's that good, in my opinion. Yeah. And so this kid is not quite on that level, but this is the kind of good program kid that you're going to hear stories about when he's a senior, about how important this kid is to the program if he sees it through for 4 years. That's what you're going to hear about.
Well, one thing I remember hearing about Nebraska in like the 90s, Brian, when they were fantastic, was they would bring in a crazy amount of walk-ons, man, and they were quality players. So like they would beat each other up on a day in and day out process. So like that preparation matters, man. It does. And I would say this, Brian, like Notre Dame's had a few good walk-ons recently, but man, they brought in some dudes this year. I think their walk-on situation is going to be at a much higher level here moving forward. And again, I think that just breeds more into Marcus Freeman. One thing that he's been consistent about, well, he's been consistent about a bunch of things, but one major thing he's been consistent about is competition. And you can't stress competition if you don't have a lot of good football players, right? Because at some point there's going to be a breaking point of like, man, that's just a freshman. That's just a freshman walk-on behind me. Like I can take a playoff, right? No safety in the room can take a playoff with Luke Talich behind him. They can't take it because you're like, that kid is 6'3", 185 and can hit and it can play football, man. Like, that's a good football player. He should be playing at Washington State or Utah right now. Like, he should be out there on scholarship. And I think that makes the biggest difference is that there's no easy moments in practice anymore for some of these players. It's like, I need to play my ball, man. If I'm a slot receiver, Jordan Faison's behind me. Like, Jordan Faison could play, man. Like, I need to be ready to ball out. Henry Garrity, one of the depth tight ends in the class. It's like, you need to play today, man. You need to play hard and you need to be able to be your best version of yourself, or else some of these guys that are labeled a walk-on might pass you up at some point, man. Right. Like, that's where we're at.
Well, like Matt Salerno catches a lot of crap from fans, and it kind of bothers me a little bit because I feel like Matt Salerno is being punished because of decisions that Tommy Rees made, meaning like they made the decision to play him over Tobias Merriweather. But the reality is, Ryan, Matt Salerno is an excellent walk-on type of player. I mean, he was able to go out and make a catch against a Florida State and score touchdowns this year. Like, you give me Matt Salerno's every year as a walk-on, I'm loving my walk-on situation. And I think he gets a lot of flack because they view him as a negative because he should never play and all this. And I'm like, look, y'all, we need to not punish Matt Salerno for our perceptions of what Tommy Rees did in regard to playing him over younger players.
What a jerk. He comes in every day and he works his butt off and he earns some playing time. Like, come
exactly.
on,
Exactly. And so, like, you give me kids like that, that's a great walk-on situation because if you get into a pinch, he's going to go out there and help you. Your starting punt returner goes down. So you put him in the game and you ask him to field the punts, right? You've got a bunch of injuries at receiver. So you bring him in and guess what? He makes one of the best plays of the year for you. Yeah. So those are very, very important things for me.
I'm sorry. Did you want me? I'm sorry.
Your turn.
Oh, no. I mean, I already commented on it. Like, I just think that makes the difference in these types of programs is that you need that competition day in and day out. So, just kind of reiterating that again, it's like Notre Dame is a school that preaches competition. Marcus Freeman is a coach that preaches competition. And in order for there to be great competition, you need a gluttony of great football players. You need a bevy of talent around you. And I think continue to add that depth is, very important, obviously, for the program.
Yeah. Ryan, I'm going to bring up this next question for you to ask yourself, and then I want you to dive into it, and I'll be right back because I hear my dog crying upstairs, and I need to go check on it. So I'm going to bring this one up for you.
Sounds good. That question
this is in regard from Kay. She put this up, Ryan, when we were talking about the 2025 quarterbacks. So
okay. Yep. So Katie Keevers has a question. Thank you so much for the question, Katie. She said, who is Notre Dame in the best position with at the point in the process? Katie, it's obviously really early. One thing that we'll hit on is, there's during a recruiting process, especially when we're talking about sophomores, it's about really setting the stage and setting the foundation for those recruitments, right? So like there's like one of those kids is not going to commit pretty much anywhere probably for a few months. Like there's some kids that commit as sophomores, but we're going to be talking about more, closer to their junior year, probably more summerish is probably when you usually get some commitments off the board, or if not going into their junior year, obviously, right? So for me, if you asked me, and you did ask me, who are we in the best position with? I would say right now, the guys that I feel most confident in, I guess, would be probably Cutter Boley, who is obviously the quarterback out of Kentucky. Because he's been on campus before. And then you talk about, Deuce, obviously, down there in Mississippi. He's a guy that, again, you have been in there. Like, you are getting him on campus on April 1st. You look at him and say, if you have a great visit, that is a player where, you might be able to, move things forward and set a good foundation with. Bryce Underwood is a complete unknown. He's a guy that is being recruited by everyone. He's a guy that has never been on campus, to my knowledge, at the University of Notre Dame. So you have no baseline there. I think George McIntyre, and I've had conversations with George leading up to him being recruited and being offered even beforehand. I think that he is also very much intrigued by Notre Dame. But if you had to ask me right now, I'd say Cutter Boley is the guy that has been on campus before, the guy that, but again, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily pushing for Cutter Boley. But in order to be a position, there has to be like mutual interest, if that makes sense. So I think him. I think Deuce is another guy that is going to be on campus here soon that you're going to have an opportunity with. Other than that, you don't really know what KJ Lacey's interest level are. You don't really know what a guy like a Bryce Underwood's interests are. So that's really something that's going to be determined as it kind of moves forward in the process. But this is kind of a foundational relationship building process for Notre Dame. And it'll be interesting the next few weeks to see how many of these guys get on campus, obviously, this offseason.
Yeah, because it's really early for those kids, Ryan. I mean, it's really early. We're still 3-4 months away from where CJ Carr was when he committed, and CJ committed early. You know what I mean? Like CJ committed really early for a quarterback. You know, he was one of the first 2025 4 quarterbacks to commit, the big time quarterbacks to commit. So we won't really know where they are till, like you said, Ryan, till they all get on campus.
Exactly.
And so, you know, and honestly, I don't know if they necessarily know for sure right now who their number one guy is. I'm very curious to see if they even have an idea of who their number one guy is at this point.
Like a pecking order of the list. Right. Like who knows? Yeah, exactly.
Right. Or is it like they're just all so good that it doesn't really matter? We'll take whoever wants to come. I mean, to a degree, if you're like, hey, look, between Bryce Underwood, Deuce Knight, KJ Lacey, and George McIntyre, I'll take the first one that wants to commit. I'm like, okay, sure. I mean, I may have one guy here, one guy there, but it's like, yeah, they're all dudes. You don't pass on one of those guys because you want to wait on another. None of them are so good that you wait on him, right? Now, there's other quarterbacks on the board that say, hey, let's hold off and kind of see what happens here before we make a move. That would be my thing. That's where I would be with some of those guys. Yep. So good question. Here's one that's got people fired up, right? I'm gonna bring up 2 right now that kind of talk about the same topic. So
okay. Here from Revolver 6238 said Hillman committed to Michigan. This can't keep happening.
He signed with Michigan.
He did sign with Michigan, yeah. And then Salty followed up with, so Notre Dame's admissions standards were too high, but Michigan's aren't. This is a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah. It is 100%, because I can't go into details yet, Ryan, because I don't have the authority from his side to get into the specifics yet. And so I'm not going to talk about a kid's academic situation or how it happened until, you know, he's comfortable with that.
Sure.
But this was an unforced error by Notre Dame more than anything else. And if your thing is, well, he was supposed to get a grade and he didn't get it, it's not an accurate representation of what really happened based on the conversation I've had. And that's all I can say right now. This is inexcusable. This is the football program not being supported by the administration. That's all it is. And I'm going to have a lot more to say about this when the time is right. Right now is not the time. But that's about all I'm going to be able to say on that one at the present moment. Yeah. So, but yeah, Sadie is a little emotional right now, Ryan. I heard her crying like she was in pain. She gets like really high pitched yell. But apparently Angela and Rita left for the vet.
So she's lonely.
Yes. Well, she's not lonely. She's normally used to when Rita leaves, she leaves.
Sure.
It's like, it was really funny. We remember when Rita got really sick. Mm-hmm. And we thought we were going to lose her. We were at the hospital down in Fort Wayne or Purdue, and Sadie would lay on the floor staring at the door that Rita came out of. And whenever Rita would come back in, she'd like just go nuts and go sniff her. And then Angela took Rita to the vet about a month ago, and Sadie was just sitting there staring at the door, and she heard Rita yelp in the back because Rita got a shot. She had to get some blood taken, and Rita yelped, and Sadie went nuts. So she's definitely a very motherly. And she doesn't like it when Rita leaves, but she sounded like she was in pain. So that's why I was like, okay, hold on. Did she get caught in something? Did something happen? I wasn't sure what was going on. So that's why I had to go up and check on her, you know?
Gotcha.
So she's my little 3-legged dog. So, you know, if no one's around, I knew Angela wasn't here, but I didn't know that Rita was gone. And then I saw a text message from Angela that, that she left with Rita. So apologies on that one. But Ryan, I don't know if you have much more you want to say. I kind of want to hold off on this a little bit until we're able to, but there's no reason that Brandon Hillman shouldn't be in Notre Dame's class right now. None.
I mean, it's ridiculous, man. It's disheartening. I mean, you can pick whatever adjective you want. It's unfortunate. I mean, it's not even just unfortunate for Notre Dame football. It's also unfortunate for Brandon Hillman. Like, did we talk about enough that he's not going to
wanting to make a difference in kids' lives? Do you know how much of an impact you could have in this young man's life? You know, I mean,
he got again, like we don't know if he would have, what would have happened as far as when he got here and how long he would have stayed here, if he would have graduated, like all that stuff's up for debate, right? Up for conversation. But at the end of the day, you may have costed him the opportunity to be a graduate of the University of Notre Dame and be set up for the rest of his life. Like that may have been what's on the table here. So,
yep. All right, let's get on to some more questions. Here we go, Ryan.
From Brandon Plensner, what's the staff's hesitation on IOC? I don't know how to pronounce that. Epinesa. It's AJ Epinessa's little brother. How come no pot of gold offer for him?
I don't know. I've put a feeler out on that one and haven't heard back yet on that. I don't know. He's a good football player, Ryan.
He's in Illinois.
I've seen. I think Rivals has him as the number one player in the state of Illinois. I don't think he's better than Nathaniel Marshall. I don't
think so either. No,
but he's a good football player. I mean, I'd rank him higher. I mean, he's better than Chris Burgess is right now. I don't know if his ceiling is as high, and he's better than Gabe Kaminsky right now. Again, I'm not quite sure if his ceiling is as high, but he's a good football player. Beyond that, I don't have a clue. I don't want to. Man, I know some of the reasons his brother didn't look at Notre Dame. I don't know if those are the same reasons that he is not either. But he's a good football player. Right. I don't know if he's a guy that I think is so good that I'm like, wow, how have they not offered this guy yet? Right? I'm not quite sure.
And we don't know the staff's opinion on him as a player, right? I mean, like we look at the recruiting rankings and he's ranked pretty high, and it's
ninth by 24/7, 14th by Rivals. Not yet. Maybe he does eventually become that, but he's not as big as his brother was at the same age. He's not as powerful as his brother was at the same age. He's a good football player. Don't get me wrong, but he's more top 150 right now, top 100 right now than he is top 15, which is where he's ranked.
Yeah. AJ Epinesa was a big dude, man. He was a big
guy. Oh, yeah. And then another one from Brandon is another 2025 kid from Illinois that doesn't have an offer yet either.
Are there thoughts on 2025 Illinois defensive lineman Jalen Williams out of Palatine? Should he have received an offer? I've not seen him, Brian, so this would be for you.
I mean, again, he's offerable talent-wise, but I don't want to comment on why he hasn't been offered yet until I know why. Maybe it's academic. Maybe they've tried to recruit him and he's not interested. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why. Maybe there are certain things that he needs to do it could be a lot of those things. And I don't know the answer. And if I were to say, hey, it's because of this, I don't know. It could be is that they're screwing it up like they did Justin Scott. It could be that too. I mean, it could be that. I don't want to critique them and criticize them until I know why he's not offered. And then I also don't want to try to explain to you why I don't think he should be offered. But look, he's a 6'6", 280-pound defensive tackle that moves pretty well for his size. He's a really good football player. Why he hasn't been offered, I don't know.
Sounds good in theory. Again, I haven't watched him, so I don't know. I don't know.
Like, look, we knew Justin Scott's situation. We knew that they dropped the ball on that. We knew he had great grades. We knew all that stuff. We knew he was talented. There was no excuse for that. I don't know enough about Jalen Williams relative to how much I knew about Justin Scott a year ago to be able to make that same claim, to be completely honest with you.
Right.
All right. Here's one from Nathan Milton. I'll read for you, Ryan, so you can answer it. And it is it is about Gearby Lambert. And he has like 5 of these all I want to knows, right?
Okay.
So all I want to know is where we are, where Notre Dame is with Gearby Lambert.
I like that phrasing of all I want to know. I might work with that somehow in an article. I don't know. But Nathan, great question. Look, I mean, it's pretty much similar. I should have some intel on visits that Gearby has planned for the spring and summer here pretty soon. So make sure to pay attention at boards@irishbreakdown.com, Nathan, because I know you're on there. But for anybody else that's interested about Gearby Lambert, I should have an update as far as what visits are being scheduled. But ultimately, you were in a good spot with Harry Heastand, right? You make an offensive line coach, obviously switch. It's going to be very dependent on Joe Rudolph creating a relationship with him. If he has one already, that's great. But like to continue to build that relationship, getting him on campus is going to be massive for the Gearby Lambert conversation, because I think Notre Dame is still in a good spot. I think it's consistent, but it's about getting him back on campus and closing the deal. But at the end of the day, I will have a update as far as what visits he has scheduled, if he's getting back to Notre Dame, and when, on the message board probably here in the next couple of days. So stay tuned to that. But I think that you're in a good spot. It's just about the relationship with Coach Rudolph and closing the deal and getting him back on campus.
All right, good stuff. Let's get to this next one here. We have one from Andre Tonsil.
Andre's question is, I am all in on spring ball. Who's your number one player on offense and defense?
Who's your number one player on offense? I mean, I think that one's easy, right? Right now, it's Joe Alt. We'll see if somebody can overtake him for that. On defense, I think it's also easy for the spring. For the spring, it's Benjamin Morrison. I don't know if I would definitely say it's Benjamin Morrison in the fall. If Cam Hart's consistent this year, Cam Hart could be their best corner. I mean, there's a reason why people kept throwing at Benjamin Morrison. Right? And why USC avoided him.
Right.
Because they could. They didn't have Tariq or Cam to throw at. Cam could be that guy this year. No, we'll see who has the higher ceiling, because Cam will be a fifth-year senior. Benjamin will be a sophomore. I don't know if anyone else can compete for that mantle, Ryan, than those two guys. I mean, maybe a Jordan Patelho does. Maybe a Riley Mills does. Maybe, some young guy explodes like Benjamin did last year. Maybe Josh Burnham has the kind of jump as a sophomore that Benjamin Morrison had as a freshman. Who knows? But right now, I mean, going into spring with Cam, I don't know Cam Hart's status for the spring. This is my thoughts and opinion based on him having a shoulder surgery in basically December-ish, late November, December-ish. Most likely, I'd say he's probably not going to be full 100% doing everything this spring. So with that being the case, I'd say Benjamin Morrison would be my one for defense.
And I think – well, I think that you hit on it perfectly, because I think when you go into spring ball and you go into just this process like this, the best player is going to be kind of determined by what they have, what the resume is, right? Now the resume says Joe Alt's an All-American from last year. The resume says Benjamin Morrison just led your team with 6 interceptions and he was a freshman All-American. So when you kind of add those together, I think that those are the only two answers right now. I guess if someone wants to make a conversation that it's Sam Hartman on offense, I guess you can have that conversation. But for me, it would be Joe Alt. On defense, I think it's kind of a no-brainer for Benjamin Morrison. Leaving spring, it could be a completely different person. You're heading into the fall, completely different person. But resumes are obviously what matters kind of going into the process, and then things change usually.
Look, Sam Hartman's a heck of a football player.
Yes.
Heck of a football player. He's not as good as Joe Alt. I mean, he's not.
Agree.
He's not. And that's no knock on him. You're talking about a guy that's one of the 2 or 3 best players in the country at his position. A first-team All-American as a true sophomore. Yeah, it's not in the same deal. It's not in the same deal. So, all right, let's get down to some more here, Mr. Roberts. Here we got one from Jay Henry.
Jay says, Ryan, Brian, have we started to see a difference in recruiting philosophies between Tommy Rees and Jared Parker in the 2025 offers?
It's still too early for me on that. It's still too early for me to know who is Jared Parker recruiting. I'll say this about the quarterback offers. There's a little bit more diversity of skill set in this quarterback class than we saw in 23 and 24, and even 22 to a degree, although you did have Gavin Wimson in the 22 class. But there was a type that Tommy Rees was kind of getting to.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing them being a little bit more aggressive with quarterback offers this early. Normally, it would be like one at a time. I like the fact that they've now got, 7 quarterbacks offered, and they're all really good. Well, 6 of them are really good. The other one's good. Ryan Montgomery's good. I just not as good as the others. So a little bit more aggressive there in that particular position, but overall, it's too early to really have a feel. I think as the 24 class starts to evolve, as the 25 class starts to pick up, then we'll start getting a better sense of what his personal preferences are.
Yeah, and then we obviously want to see the impact he has with, closing and, being able to be a lead recruiter other than just recruiting tight ends, because tight end board's great. I know he's going to recruit some tight ends, but, he's going to be obviously involved in quarterback recruiting, wide receiver recruiting, offensive line recruiting. He's going to be a lot more heavily involved. So I'm very curious to see what his overall impact, but to your point, Brian, you didn't really get much indication of that in these recent, in this offer list. It's just more, wow, it's a really talented group. That's awesome, man. Let's see what the impact is now.
Yep. All right. Good question, Jay. Let's see. We got another one from Mr. Milton. Another all I want to know is.
Nathan wants to know, all I want to know is where are we with Justin Scott? Well, Nathan, we saw this morning that Justin Scott announced that he is visiting Notre Dame this weekend. So that's a good sign, right? I think that what we're looking at now, because we know obviously Justin has the official visit scheduled to Georgia, in April. So like that's going to be a conversation piece for Notre Dame fans, of course. I think that what we're looking at right now is that Notre Dame has been aggressive to get him on campus this weekend. And Justin Scott is now returning to campus, which is a great sign. I think Notre Dame, it's a Notre Dame Georgia battle, in my opinion. I don't think Michigan's in this one like they maybe were a couple months ago. I think that Notre Dame is still in a very good spot with Justin Scott. But at the end of the day, they're going to go toe-to-toe with an SEC power to the defending two-time national champion. Like they'll have to stand tall and continue to sell, obviously, their program. Get a great opportunity to kickstart some momentum this weekend and get Justin back on campus. And then from there, Brian, it's for me is, can you get him back one more time to close the deal? I think that's a big opportunity for the staff.
It's a huge one, Ryan. I mean, you've got to get 2 more visits out of him. He's going to be at Georgia, April 14th to 16th. So, here's my, because we were talking about that this morning, like what would the justification be for bringing him in this weekend? And my whole big thing is they need to get some momentum back going with him. There's no doubt. They've got a lot of momentum going. He's been close to committing to Notre Dame a couple times. He has gone out and, decided he wanted to slow down a little bit, which is totally fine. I mean, look, kids should make their decisions when they're ready. Simple as that. And, Justin's not one of those kids that wants to do the whole decommitment thing. He wants to make one decision. And so I'd rather him wait. Like it would have been better for Notre Dame to never have Keon Keeley in the class than to have had him and lost him. Just the perception of it and all. And then, you think you have him and then you down the road, you say no to certain kids. And then eventually down the road, he leaves and now you're stuck and all the kids that you could have had are committed somewhere else. Right.
Yep.
So that's kind of where you are with Justin Scott is make the decision when and you're right and you're ready. I think that's kind of where I'm at with the whole thing. And so, look, where is he going to visit? We know he's going to visit for sure Georgia. I think he's probably going to get out and see Ohio State again this spring or summer. He's talked about maybe going down to Miami. There's some other places I think he'll go. But if you're Notre Dame, as you said, Georgia, to me, Ohio State, and Michigan, more so Ohio State, are the schools right now that I'm most concerned about at this point in time. It's really Georgia and Ohio State. So you get him on campus early, get some momentum back, get some love in him, remind him why he was ready to pop for you in the first place, knowing he's going to take other visits. So you're not turning on the heat to try to get him commit because that'll have a negative impact. But then you basically do everything you can between now and April 22nd to convince him to come back for the Blue Gold game. So get him back on campus on the weekend after he visits Georgia, and you can stop that momentum again. And that's going to be the big key. You say, hey, look, you're going to go there. You're going to love it. I know you're going to love it. Athens is a beautiful place. Been there. It's an awesome place. Don't make any decisions, right? Come back here. Because I don't think he will commit to Georgia, but, Georgia's going to be putting the screws on him as much best as they can. Let's come back to Notre Dame the next weekend. And I think that would be if I could plot it out, if I was the recruiting coordinator or if I was kind of talking to Chad Bowden, that would be my advice to him. It's like, look, and Al Washington and Marcus Freeman, you got to do whatever you can to get him back on campus on the 22nd. Get him to commit to coming back that weekend as soon as you can so he doesn't fill that weekend up with somewhere else because there's going to be other people having Blue Gold games that weekend. I think Ohio State's is I think that weekend. I could be wrong on that. I wish Archer was in the chat today. He could let us know when it is. If there's any other Ohio State fans listening, let us know when the Ohio State spring game is. But I think that's the end up goal. Yeah. Yep. Somebody just said something here about Brandon Hillman. Did he meet the requirements? If not, then no. It's plain and simple. Notre Dame doesn't make exceptions for athletes. I'm okay. That's flat out false. That's flat out false. If Notre Dame's football team had only players that met the school's overall standards for admissions, the football team would look way different than it does. Right. It would look like Harvard and Penn and Yale. It would not look like the version of it. They absolutely make exceptions for student athletes. Absolutely do. They've brought in kids with much lower academics than what I have been told Brandon Hillman's are. And there's guys on the team with lower academics than him. So No, that's absolutely false. That's not even remotely true. Most of the kids on the football team, would not get into Notre Dame if it was just about academics. They wouldn't. They wouldn't. And that's okay. That's not an insult. They're more than capable of thriving at Notre Dame. That says more about the admissions process than it does about their intelligence or ability to thrive at Notre Dame. There's a lot of kids that could thrive at Notre Dame. There's just not a lot that are going to get in. That's the difference. And so, no, trust me, they make exceptions for the vast majority of the kids on the football. Are there kids that could get in on their own? Of course.
Yes.
Of course. Corey Robinson for sure could have got in on his own.
Sullivan Absher could have definitely gotten in on his own.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Charles Jagasol could have probably got in on his own. There's definitely guys that can. It's just not most of them. I mean, Ryan, we're talking about guys that were 3.4s and 3.5s that are great students. If you take football off of the equation, they're not getting into school.
Right.
They're just not. Now, you could argue that that's part of the problem with admissions today is that it's so, this standard, instead of saying, hey, this is a phenomenal young man or young woman that would bring tremendous value to our institution, who I think is going to be an incredibly successful person that I want as a paying back alum someday. And, Notre Dame does that to a degree. They do that to a degree. I think overall you don't see enough of it. And it's hard to do that, Ryan, with as many kids as are applying to Notre Dame. And in defense of the admissions department, it's hard to get to know every single kid that applies to Notre Dame.
Absolutely.
And so at some point there has to be some sort of, okay, you may be the next Bill Gates, but you're a 2.5, right? As far as the business, but you're a 2.5. Like I can't possibly know that. I can't say, well, let me every 2.5 that applies to Notre Dame, let me get to know. You don't have enough people to do that. It's not doable.
Okay.
So in defense, there's kind of there's that. And again, from what I know of Jeremiah's academic situation, his standards were not below what we've seen Notre Dame make exceptions for plenty of times, including a lot of guys who have graduated and done well at Notre Dame. So no, I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that at all. All right, here we go, Ryan. Here's one from Rob Lobo.
Rob says, Ryan, what did you see in last year's spring practices that concerned you? I mean, so I only saw one spring practice, Rob. Nothing. I mean, Brian, I'm trying to think back. I mean,
was either the first day.
Yeah, it was like
if you're concerned about a team on the first day of spring ball with no pads on, it's a problem.
Yeah,
it's a problem.
I mean, because there was a lot of things I loved about it. I mean, I thought that there was a high level of competition. I loved the interaction between coaches and players for the most part. There was nothing that was overly concerning. But again, you don't get the full view from the media side of practices, right? Give me the full access to everything, and I'll be able to tell you exactly what I didn't like, because it's more about the maturation of the camp than the first day of camp, if that makes sense.
Well, and it was just so much of it was new, Ryan, too. It's you had a whole bunch of brand new football. I've seen people say, well, we're not going to rank Notre Dame that high because they've got so much coaching turnover. I'm hold on a second. You had them in the top 10 last year, and they had almost a brand new staff. They lost 3 coaches out of 10 assistants, and you're concerned about all the coaching turnover at Notre Dame this year. It's come on, guys, let's let's be consistent with this one. But to me, you're always going to look good on the first day of practice to a degree. Now, some things that I heard from people I wasn't at practices last year, Ryan, so I'll just tell you some things that I heard from people that I knew that were at more practices, obviously not media people, but other people, is early on Lorenzo Styles was having drop problems in the spring, and early on Drew Pine was having turnover problems in the spring. Those were 2 big glaring things that were happening very early, and Tyler Buckner would look great at times, and then other times he would just, his mechanics would get into a funk and he wouldn't be as good, which we kind of saw a little bit this year. But he was clearly the better quarterback from everybody I talked to that was at practice. But they're still learning to be consistent, which you'd expected. Sure. But Drew Pines took a step back starting last spring, according to everybody that I saw. And Lorenzo Styles, his issues that came to be prominent during the fall started in the spring. Those are the only things that I've really heard a lot of, besides, what you and I have talked about with the players talking about how, there was it was complicated. It was a complicated system. It was a complicated system from beginning on defense. All right, so let's get to some more here, Ryan. I'll read these next 2 from Nathan Milton so you can answer them.
Okay.
Nathan Milton asks, all I want to know is where is Notre Dame with Bronte Johnson?
Look, I think that Notre Dame likes Bronte a lot. I mean, and I think that
likes
Bronte,
Notre Dame a lot.
I was about to say, and I think that is definitely reciprocated. Like, I mean, that's a school that he grew up, knowing a lot about, obviously, being an Indiana kid. But the end all be all, Nathan, is that, like, can he thrive at a place in Notre Dame from an academic perspective? Like, that is going to be like the conversation, right? Is he able to get in and be successful from an academic perspective? Like, that's where we are with Bronte. I think if it was just simply football, that would be a spot for Bronte Johnson, and there might still be a spot for Bronte Johnson. But the end all be all is that you have to make sure that every side is a fit, every side is compatible, every side he can thrive in. And I just think there's some questions about that right now.
And that's kind of where we've been for a long time. So I don't know who's reporting it, but I've had a lot of people say, hey, there's a lot of concerns about, Bronte and Notre Dame and academics. I'm like, yeah, that's always been true. That's not new. That's always been the concern. We've said that 100 times. So I don't know where this new thing is coming from, but it's still early. He's got time. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. But Notre Dame likes him as a player a lot. And the Notre Dame coaches, I believe, think he can thrive academically at Notre Dame. I do think that they believe that. Now, whether or not the admissions department believes that or not is the question mark at this point in time. But that's going to be the concern. And then we have another one from Nathan Milton, Ryan. All I want to know is where Notre Dame is with Ryan Wingo. That's the last of his all I want to knows for today.
This is a situation where, Nathan, I've been very consistent with this, I believe, throughout the process. I think that Notre Dame's in a better position with Ryan Wingo than some people believe, but also it's always going to be a tough pool. Like all the schools across the country are going after Ryan Wingo. So this was always going to be a major battle. I think that for Notre Dame to have a realistic chance to land Ryan Wingo, they have to get him back on a visit sometime this spring. Have to get him back. Have to make that build momentum, because the biggest thing with Ryan Wingo for me, Brian, is like, I know people are like future casting him to like Tennessee, or they did like a couple months ago and stuff. I think that was super premature. I don't think that there's a clear leader for Ryan Wingo right now. I genuinely don't. So anytime that's a fact, Notre Dame still has a chance, but at the end of the day, Notre Dame is going to have to get him back on campus and really keep selling, man, keep pushing. So are they in the race for him? Yes. Would I necessarily predict him Notre Dame? No, just because there's so much competition for him, man, at the end of the day. But I think that he is a kid that
and
fits.
What do they have to sell right now, Ryan? I mean, look at the offense they had last year. Look, I'd love to have Ryan Wingo in this class. He's a great player, but Notre Dame can have a great receiving class without Ryan Wingo. It's all about who you close on, and that's going to be the key, in my opinion. All right. Let's here we go. Here's another one, Ryan, from actually, I want to get to this one from Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker. This is an interesting one because I don't know if you'll be able to speak on this one or not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So his question is better college linebacker, Derek Brooks or Jalen Smith? I know Derek Brooks was a phenomenal player at Florida State. It's not in my memory bank, obviously. I know him as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. So
for me, Ryan, I do remember Derek Brooks, and he was a heck of a college football player. There's no doubt. He was not as good as Jalen Smith, though, in my opinion. He was not. And you look at the numbers, like at Derek Brooks, he had, in his 4 years, he had 22 tackles, 98 tackles, 77 tackles, 77 tackles. Now, part of that is the way that the position was played. The will doesn't produce as much volume tackling-wise. One of his years, he was on the same defense as Marvin Jones, who was like the best linebacker in college football, had like 130 tackles or something one year. He was a very talented player, and he was a very good college football player. He was never quite as dominant as Jalen was. He never had, like, his most tackles for loss in the season was like 7. Jalen had over 9 2 years in a row. I think Jalen was a more dynamic player. Now, Derek played one more year, but like Derek had 22 tackles as a freshman. Jalen had 65. So I think about 65, 67. So Jalen was the better player, obviously. And Jalen would have been a top 10 NFL draft pick, just like Derek Brooks, if it wasn't for the injury. I mean, the fact that he went in the 30s with as devastating of a knee injury that he had. I mean, leg injury, wasn't even a knee, it was a leg. His whole leg was affected. says everything you need to know about how good Jalen Smith was before that injury. Because for most human beings, I'd say 99% of the players in those drafts, they're not getting drafted. Like 99% of linebackers in college football don't get drafted if they have the same injury that Jalen. I mean, Miles Jack's injury wasn't nearly as bad as Jalen Smith's, and he fell into the second round. Jalen's a top 10 player if he doesn't have the injury. There's no doubt, in my opinion. And he was a decent NFL player for a couple of years, I believe, even with that injury. But he was Derek Brooks. I'll say this. Derek Brooks was a big name. He was an All-American in college, so he was really good. He was an even better pro than he was a college player. That's the thing about Derek Brooks.
He was a great NFL player. Great NFL
player. Tremendous. All right, we've got some more. Here we go.
From Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, based on college and pro career, who is the greatest Notre Dame player from college and pros? I say Joe Montana. What say you guys? Go Irish. And I can only work off of my lifetime, right? So my lifetime of guys that I've seen, probably Harrison Smith, I guess. I mean, Zach Martin. No, I lied. Zach Martin is the best for me because he was a stalwart at left tackle for Notre Dame for his entire career. And he has turned into, he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer in the NFL, right? He is the best guard of this era. And I think if he has 2 to 3 more years of what he's been doing, he has an argument to maybe be the best guard of all time, like that from the NFL side of things. So I guess Zach Martin would probably be my answer.
For me, any player from college and the pros, from college, for me, it's Rocket Ismail and Bryant Young. One offense, one defense are the best I saw as college players. As pros, look, I saw Joe Montana in the pros. He was the best offensive player Notre Dame's ever produced, and Tim Brown's number 2. And with all due respect to Zach Martin, again, this is before your time. He's in that conversation with Tim Brown eventually for number 2. He's not in the same conversation with Joe Montana. He's just not there for pros. But again, Joe Montana was out of his prime, Ryan, when you were born. He had already won his 4 Super Bowls by the time you were born. So I get that one completely. So I feel very old because I watched 3 of his 4 Super Bowls. Although I was very young I was born on all 4, but I don't remember the first one and I barely remember the second one, but I definitely remember the last 2, especially the last one. That was devastating for me because I was over the Broncos. That was that 55-10 Super Bowl for the Broncos.
Yep.
Defensively, of my lifetime, be probably Bryant Young of my lifetime.
Yeah.
And offensively, it's. I'm sorry, I forgot a guy. It's the guys in the conversation for me. It's obviously Joe Montana, Tim Brown, Zach Martin, and I forgot about Jerome Bettis. Jerome Bettis is in that conversation. Jerome Bettis is a Hall of Famer. So you're talking about what will eventually be 4 Hall of Fame players. Zach Martin's just not there yet, obviously, because he's still playing. Yep. Defensively, it's probably Bryant Young, and I don't know if it's really close. He's the only guy that I really remember being a Hall of Fame caliber player. Todd Light was a very good player for a long time. He was never a star in the NFL like he was in college. Harrison Smith is probably the next closest thing. I think Harrison Smith's probably the next closest to being a Hall of Fame player of any Notre Dame defensive player that's come out, right? Stephon Tuitt had some really good years, but injuries kind of derailed him a little bit. I don't know. Tom Carter was not very good in the pros. Bobby Taylor was pretty decent for a number of years. Jeff Burris had some good years in the NFL. I can't really. Justin Tuck was a good player in the NFL, but Bryant Young was a Hall of Famer in the NFL.
Yeah.
He was a star for a decade. And Harrison Smith to me is the next guy with the Hall of Fame resume. When you're the best player in your league or among it for about a decade, I think that's Hall of Fame caliber at your position. I think that's Hall of Fame caliber. It's debatable. It's not as surefire as Zach Martin's, in my opinion, but I think Harrison Smith has a Hall of Fame resume, especially if you can put a couple quality seasons together. At his age, if he's just quality player, that's a heck of a player for, most safeties don't play in the NFL as long as Harrison Smith has played in the NFL, so that would be mine for defense. Not as many defensive stars as we see on offense for me.
Sure.
But yeah, that trio of Montana, Tim Brown, and Jerome Bettis is pretty good. It's pretty good. It's not bad at all.
Doesn't suck.
Not bad at all. No, it does not. Here we go. Got last couple before we get up out of here.
From Tyler Smith, said, my buddy who's an Ohio State fan asked me which player represents and looks how Freeman played in college. I personally think J.D. Bertrand or Prince Kali, but wanted your guys' opinion on this.
Ooh. I mean, honestly, the guy that most resembles Marcus Freeman in college, they just moved to Viper. That's Junior Tuihalamaka. I mean, Marcus Freeman was like a 6'2", 240-pound middle linebacker.
Yep.
So, J.D. Bertrand isn't
shorter.
Shorter, a little bit more, more built on athleticism, not as powerful as Coach Freeman was when he played.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy that represents him best from Notre Dame he was probably Manti was closer in body type plus style of play. Manti was a better player, obviously, but as far as style of play, that would be the closest. Marcus Freeman had like over 100 tackles his last 2 years. He was a 4th-round NFL draft pick. He was a good linebacker.
He was very good.
He just wasn't the athlete that like AJ Hawk was. That's the problem. Like AJ Hawk was a great player and a freaky athlete for his size. I mean, he was, I won't say freaky. He was very athletic for his size, but he was a incredibly instinctive and talented football player.
Yep.
Coach Freeman wasn't quite on that level. He's a good football player. Like I said, 2 times, I think he had over 200 tackles or over 100 tackles. I'm actually going to pull this up real quick. I want to make sure that I'm correct on this. I believe he had 2 years of over 100 tackles. He had 1 for sure. Just give me 1 second. He only had 1. I'm sorry. He had 109 tackles in 2007, and he had 84 in 2008. But in both years, he had 9.5 tackles for loss on a pretty good linebacking core, Ryan. So yeah, he was a good football player. So he had let's see here, he had 71 in 06, he had 109 in 07, and then 84 in 2008. And I think 2 of those teams he played on, they were played for a national championship. They played for the championship in 06 and 07, lost both times to SEC teams. But the other thing too is you got to remember the year that Marcus Freeman had 84 tackles and 9.5 tackles for loss. Part of that was because James Laurinaitis had 130 tackles on that team.
He was a monster, man. James was a monster.
Yeah. Now the year before, James Laurinaitis had 121 and Coach Freeman had 109. But they had a couple safeties on those teams too that made a lot of tackles. If you remember, Kurt Coleman. Yep, yeah, Kurt Coleman was on that team. Malcolm Jenkins was on that team. They had some pretty good. Vernon Golston was on that football team as well. They had some pretty good football players in that year. And then in 2006, their linebacking core was again, it was James Laurinaitis was at 115, Marcus Freeman was at 71, and then that team had some really productive players. Antonio Smith had 71 tackles on that team, so in 10 tackles for loss. So he was, they had a lot of productive guys back then, Ryan, on defense. So, but yeah, I mean, not as good as Manti, but similar. That's probably the closest in style of play. 6'2", 240, box guy. Yeah. I'd say that's the closest I'd say to him. Do you ever remember watching him play in college?
Marcus?
Yeah.
Yeah, Marcus was really good. I used to love James Laurinaitis back when he was with Ohio State, because then he transitioned to a really good NFL career for a while with the Los Angeles Rams. Well, they were the St. Louis Rams, I think, the St. Louis Rams for the entirety of his career. But yeah, Marcus was a really good player, man. Really good player. Kurt Coleman I couldn't stand Kurt Coleman because he was extremely over the top with some of his actions, but like he was a really physical player too.
Productive. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, very good.
All right, we're going to wrap it up here with this question from Brandon Plensner. I'm going to ask this one, Ryan, since it's a recruiting question, so you can answer it. He says, does the number of tight end offers already in 2025 surprise you? Don't think the number will be 1 in 2025, or don't you think the number will be 1 in 25 or going for 2 again?
I mean, it really depends, Brandon. I mean, and to answer the first question, the second question first, is that it depends on, if there's defections from the roster, if some of these guys that are getting injured don't, get back healthy and aren't able to, continue to progress in their Notre Dame career. If you if you miss out on a couple guys in the 2024 class and you get Jack Larson as the lone tight ends, like there's a lot of variables, I think, that could switch numbers up. Like, so I don't want to focus on the numbers too much. Am I surprised that there's 8 guys offered in this class? No, because there's a really good tight end class, it looks like, man. Like, there's a lot of guys that listen and be like, I would love that guy, and I would love that guy, and I would love that guy. So I'm not overly surprised, because I think it's a really strong tight end group. And again, I think the numbers, when you kind of get infatuated with that, it really depends on how guys
So early.
progress, the numbers, injuries. Like,
And
there's
you
so
want to
many
hear how nuts
factors.
this is?
Yeah.
By the time the 25 class shows up on campus, Holden Stace and Eli Raritan will be seniors, meaning they'll be eligible to leave for the draft already before those guys show up. So right now you've got to recruit for volume in that class. And then as your roster takes more shape over the next couple of years, then you can maybe narrow down or expand at some positions if you need to. So I would much rather err on the side of over recruiting that position right now, especially since most of those kids are not in position to commit right now. I mean, most aren't. But yeah, I'd take 2. I mean, because someone's going to get hurt. Someone's going to break out and go pro. I mean, all those things are going to happen. Somebody's not going to be as good as you think they're going to be. So yeah, keep recruiting 2. And look, tight end is a position where I'd take 2 almost in a 4-year cycle. I would take 2 all 3 of the 4 years. And I just would, because again, you're going to, in today's era of the transfer portal, of injuries happening, yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. It's not that you need to take 2 every year. It's just I'd recruit that way, and then be in position to kind of do what you're going to do. I'd be curious to see who the number 2 tight end is in the 24 class, because if they get Jaden Riddell, I think that impacts the kind of tight end you have to look for in 2025. I think if you get Jaden Riddell to go with Jack Larson, you kind of have to look at it and say, hey, you need a little bit more of a traditional tight end.
Like a Ryan Gee that was offered out of Texas, like more of a blocking type and line guy. Yeah, to your point.
So, and look, I'll tell you something right now, talking about legacy recruits, James Flanagan is legit. He's Jim Flanagan's son, who played on the defensive end on the 93 team. He's legit, Ryan. Like, that's not a legacy offer. That's a legacy who earned an offer. That kid's legit. That kid's a really good football player. So, yeah, you give me him, for example, and like one other traditional type of tight end, I'm feeling very good about the future of the tight end position. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. All right, so that's going to do it, Ryan. I think for today's questions, I think that is going to do it. I don't see any super chats coming up. I think a lot of people talking about greatest players on the team. So that's going to do it. So, hey, Ryan, good stuff today. Looking forward to getting all the content you've got coming out, because Ryan's going to have a lot more recruiting content coming out. Tomorrow is going to be a lot of spring preview type of stuff. I chose not to get all that stuff out before spring ball this year, since we're going to have so little access. A lot of that stuff we'll discuss kind of during the spring. So we'll kind of break down the rosters as we go through the spring instead of getting them all out before. But we'll start to kick those off tomorrow before spring practice starts. So definitely a lot to check out at irishbreakdown.com. You're definitely going to check that out. You can sign up for our newsletter, daily newsletter at the bottom. It doesn't come out every single day, but it comes out most days. It'll come out. So you'll definitely want to check that out. And of course, as always, everybody, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can sign up for a monthly membership at $4.99 a month. You can sign up for an annual membership at $49.99. And as everyone in the chat who's in it will tell you, it's a great value and a great board to be a part of. We talk about football primarily, but every now and then we'll dive into some different topics about different things as well. So great community. You're going to want to be a part of it. And if you want to support Irish Breakdown financially, and I've had a lot of people ask about this, and you're not a message board person, you can still sign up for the message board, and you're still supporting us financially. And that's always the best way. The 2 best ways to support us is, number 1, read all of our articles and listen to all of our shows. And then we get the ad revenue off of that. That's incredibly appreciated. The other great way to do it is to sign up for the message boards, because that is our best. Right now, that is eventually, we hope to make that our number 1 revenue source. If that's really the key, is when we build that up the way we want it to do. So always appreciate your support there. So anyway, so we're going to get rolling, everybody. Thank you so much for what you're doing. The guys tonight are going to have a show. It's going to be Vince and Sean Stiers tonight at 6 o'clock. So IB Nation Sports Talk tonight at 6 o'clock. Definitely going to check that out. They're going to have a special guest this week, which they're going to announce tonight. So that'll be pretty cool. And then we'll kind of figure out what the schedule for the rest of the week is going to look like, because obviously Sean Stiers is the voice of the Notre Dame women's basketball team. So they'll be on the road this weekend, heading down to the Sweet 16. So the ladies, it was not pretty, but hey, in the college football in the tournament, it's survive in advance. It doesn't have to be pretty. You just need to get that W. and they beat Mississippi State in a rematch of the game where Notre Dame won a national championship. Actually, yes, it was the national championship game for Notre Dame the year they won. So it was one of those shots. One of the games where Enrique Ogunbowale hit one of those big money shots down the stretch. So it definitely was good to get that W. So anyway, for Ryan, and I'm Brian, everybody have a great rest of your day. And we'll talk to you all again very, very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.